Happy New Year, everybody. Happy New Year. I hope you guys are doing great. Let me make sure my volume is okay after that loud intro. And it is not. I hope you guys are doing all right. Happy New Year. I have not seen you guys for a year, apparently, since we are in 2026. As things change, things effectively stay the same. I have been checked out. I have been needed to check out. And so it is good to be back. I hope you guys are doing all right. I hope you guys are safe. And I hope you guys are having, for at least a decent year, at the very least the day that it has been up to this point. Wherever you are, under the sound of this voice, if you can hear this voice, you have my appreciation for being here. And thank you again for joining me. So we have a damn good show for you today. And I know it's a little bit weird to start off with one day, and I realized that after the fact when I effectively booked everybody for this one day, but that's okay. One day we'll get us back on the horse, and we will move forward. So we have John Helmer. He's going to be here first thing in the morning at 7:15. We have Ted Rall. Ted Rall is going to be here at 8 o'clock. We have David Hundeyin. He's going to be here at 8:30. And we have a new guest, Dr. Issa Blumi. Make sure I want to get that right. Yes, Dr. Issa Blumi. He is going to be on the show. Shout out to Vanessa Bealey for pointing him out to me. So thank you for that. Interesting stuff that has taken place over the time that I have been on vacation. Apparently, they tried to murder Putin. There's that. And again, for the life of me, I don't know what they think. There's a saying in, I don't know if they say it today, but in the old rap game, they used to say, don't get high on your own supply. And they say that to say, look, if you're going to sell drugs, don't do drugs. This is a bad mix, right? Don't sell the thing to which, or don't use the thing to which you're selling for life and existence. And I get the sense that many of these people who are involved in these, let's say, operations, get high on their own supply. Now, the reality of it is, as I used to say during the Syrian war, when they used to say, well, Assad is a bad guy, this is the exact reason that Assad was effectively releasing chemical weapons. And I'll say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would he do that? He's taken back like 90% of his territory. He has Russians and Iranians backing him on this. And they would say, with fake sincerity, he's a bad guy. That's why. And I would point out that the only people who have any interest in dropping chemical weapons are the people who are losing. It is the losers that are willing to do that, the losers. And the reason the losers are doing that is because if nothing changes, if everything remains static, and one person makes a move and the other person makes a move, they're going to lose. And so the only way out of it is to expand the playing field. You expand the playing field by bringing other forces into the game, or in this case, into the war. The only side that is failing miserably are the Ukrainians, the Americans, and the Europeans. Don't believe the hype that the Americans are not involved in the war effort. They are. I don't care what Trump says. Ukraine is not doing this stuff without the assistance of the United States. And I would like to point out that I was right about something else. When all the terrorist attacks were taking place, and I would say, obviously, the U.S. is backing this. This will not be taking place. Meaning this energy war, the gas war that was effectively taking place was obviously put out by the Trump administration. They were looking for leverage. He was a man in search of leverage because he had none. And in the process of searching for leverage, this is what he was doing. And the New York Times, day late, dollar short that it typically is, comes out and points out, I was right. I was right. It is indeed a man in search of leverage. And granted, the story goes further into it, but for all intents and purposes, that the CIA, that a beleaguered military that had failed miserably to do and affect anything on the battlefield, had a CIA that was effectively working with the Ukrainians, and the Trump administration was all in on the attacks that were taking place on Russia. I was right. I would say it was obvious, but apparently to the New York Times, not so much. So there is that. I don't know what they think is going to happen if indeed they injured, hurt, or killed Putin. I just don't know what they think is going to take place. Do they think that whoever comes in after that is going to be timid? Do they think that the guy's going to be a peacenik? Do they think that they're going to come to some kind of terms? Or is Russia going to lose its effing mind? And I would say it is going to lose its effing mind. There we are. That's better. So on that front, that has been taking place. On the other front, you've had, this thing. I hit it just before I started, and it feels wrong to me. On the other front, you've had protests in Iran. Now, in the protests in Iran, you've had this kind of, every country has protests. You had, what is it called? Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest protests taking place in France for like 2 years, right? And of course, nobody wanted to make a big deal about it. Nobody wanted to bring it up. You've had the January 6th protests where they literally raided the Capitol, beating up cops and whatnot. Again, people, that's not a big deal because it's democracy, blah, 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 blah. And then you get protests in Iran, and they're like, the revolution cometh. I'm sorry, I got to fix this. There we are. They're like, the revolution cometh. And of course, when it's Iran, they act like it's some special phenomena that is effectively taking place. Protests are ubiquitous. It happens, right? The difference is that when it happens over there, we make a big spectacle about it. It's on front page of headlines and everything else. And Trump comes out tweeting this. If Iran shoots and violently kills protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded, ready to go. Thank you for your attention. No, he's not. No, he's not. He's lying, as Trump typically does. Trump is lying through his teeth. They're doing this in order to create some kind of, internal rebellion in Iran. But I see my guest is here, and I want to bring him in. We are joined with the man himself, John Helmer. How you doing, John? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Jamal.
How are you doing this morning? Well, it's not morning for you. It's afternoon for us. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm fine. I'm busy, trying to keep up with everything, trying to use the holiday time to finish a book. But what can we do? You'll ask the questions. The answers are difficult. We'll spend our time together very happily, but it's no holiday, is it?
No, I guess we're past the holidays. We're back into the flow of the year. We're back on the hamster wheel. Thank you for joining me, by the way. I always appreciate it when you join me. And just John Helmer, he is editor, Dances with Bears. It is a fantastic site that hosts his articles, his interviews. He is one of the best, and I always appreciate him joining me on this. I'd be remiss if I don't start with this assassination attempt that apparently was going after Vladimir Putin. Russia, and I'm fascinated by this on a few fronts. One, they go after a residence that Putin is in. Ukraine is saying that's not the case, but Russia is passing evidence to the Americans that that is the case. The Americans come out saying, well, we don't believe that was the case. We don't believe that they were going after Putin in this case, in which case Russia, annoyed, points out, well, this is complicity. If you don't accept the evidence that we're effectively giving you, this seems to be different. Under normal circumstances, usually they try to isolate Ukraine from the United States when they're pointing the finger at Ukraine for any kind of audacious attempt in this way. In this case, Russia seems to be pretty clear that, hey, if you're not going to own up to the fact that Ukraine tried to kill President Putin, this is complicity. Give me your thoughts on this, or is this a change in the way you see it from previous engagements?
This is a very big moment, but it's important I try to keep my excitement down, talk calmly, and help our audience distinguish between the military facts on the ground, which can't and shouldn't be confused with the political facts on the ground. You've just mentioned a combination of them, and the strategic consequences if one side is telling the truth or if the other side is telling the truth. Let me go through a few things here. Jamal, stop me when I'm tiring you out. The first point, there's no doubt there was a drone attack.
You're
from
perfectly
about
fine.
17:30 on Saturday evening until about 8:30 in the morning of Sunday. Some of the drones made it through the Novgorod region. They were all intercepted and shot down. There was an unusual delay. I'm looking down because I need a lot of notes to get these facts on the ground right. There was an unusual delay in reporting the attacks on the Russian side, reporting the attacks, the interceptions, and the locations of the interceptions. Foreign Minister Lavrov, and this was unusual, announced this attack. Normally, drone attacks, and they're numerous, every night, every day, are announced by the Defense Ministry in an afternoon briefing. But this time, it was the foreign minister who spoke about it. There was a delay of maybe between 10 and 18 hours between the time the drones came over Novgorod and Lavrov announced what had happened as an attack on Dalgia Barodi. Longbeards is its name in English. It's the name of the village nearest this long and a large presidential residence that dates back into the 1930s. The unusual delay and the high level of the announcement can be explained by the time it took for the Russian side to analyze the data they had obtained from the downed drones. And they say, and they show photographic evidence and more, we'll come to the more in a minute, that the targeting data in the drones, at least one of them, indicated a target was the Dalgia Barodi residential area. In addition, we have from Alexei Arestovich, the former assistant to Mr. Zelensky and a very well-informed Ukrainian, he has said, he has Western sources who say that there was a nuclear command control bunker in the presidential complex in this area, Valdai area, Dalgia Barodi complex. And it was the bunker that was targeted, not President Putin. Now, I've talked to Russian sources, obviously, the last few days. They say it's highly likely there was such a bunker. There always is such a bunker to protect the president in all the residencies. And each of those bunkers is likely to have significant command control communications. However, no one is saying, nor will they say, nor should they say, first, whether there was a command control bunker, whether there is such a bunker in the Valdai complex, and or whether President Putin was in residence there at the time. Now, the drone controller that's been recovered has been presented to the US military attaché in Moscow. Now, you haven't got the pictures, but we can just say for our audience, something very significant happened there that people don't understand. It was Admiral Igor Kostyakov, the chief of the GRU, the chief of Russian military intelligence, who's filmed presenting the evidence to the US military attaché. There you have it. On the left, Admiral Kostyakov. The American, who's not named, but who doesn't wear stars on his tabs, who appears to be a captain rank. Now, maybe I've gotten ranks wrong, but what you have there is the head of Russian military intelligence at admiral's rank briefing the man that was sent from the US military office in Moscow, a low-ranking officer who isn't the chief of the office, Rear Admiral Monero. Now, the difference in rank, the difference in clout, the difference in importance that the Russian side gave to this and the US reply is a US insult. It's an insult. You don't send a messenger boy to meet an official of that rank. That's the first point. Then what we see, and you mentioned it, is President Trump retweeting with an endorsement of the New York Post piece that appeared in New York on December the 31st. So Trump retweets the New York Post piece that says Putin attack bluster shows Russia is standing in the way of peace. That was a New York Post, that means Rupert Murdoch, editorial board statement published on the afternoon in New York on December the 30th. So Trump appears to have flipped, changed his mind from having said in the Mar-a-Lago press conference with Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu standing by, that it was a bad time for such an attack to have occurred. We can get back to exactly what Trump said, but what Trump then said later by tweet was he endorsed the idea that it was a false attack. Then we've had the New York Times, and I'm turning around to find it, published on December the 31st, saying that the CIA finding was that Ukraine did not target Putin's home. Just a couple of mentions of details, because the details give everything away that we need to understand. The two principal authors of the New York Times piece were Julian Barnes and Eric Schmidt. Both of those people are known mouthpieces for the CIA. They made themselves famous in Russia for publishing the complete and total lie back in March 2018 that Gina Haspel had briefed President Trump then that that ducks had been killed by Novichok in the Salisbury, England incident now known as the Skripal-Novichok attack. That was a complete fabrication. The briefing that Haspel gave, that Barnes and Schmidt and a couple of other New York Times writers produced, was a complete lie. It was later identified as a lie. The British identified the lie because they said no ducks were killed. But that particular briefing of the CIA for Trump back in 2018 led to Haspel's promotion to be director of the CIA. And Barnes and Schmidt were the let's say, the messenger boys for the CIA. Then, they were liars then, and they're liars now. But there's another detail here. Why is the CIA explaining to Trump military intelligence when on the Russian side, it's clear this was a military operation? The intelligence gathered from the weapons is military intelligence. The message was delivered by the head of Russian military intelligence. The counterpart agencies in the US government are military, not CIA. And yet we're told John Radcliffe, director of CIA, repeating the Haspel performance of 7 years ago, was the man who briefed Trump. Exactly when he briefed Trump isn't clear, because if you look at the calendar of Trump's recent holidays, all he's been doing is playing golf. He hasn't had the standard intelligence briefing. But of course, a CIA director with something important would, of course, go meet with him. That suggests that Ratcliffe might have been in Miami when the large table of US officials met with Zelensky. Such a long table: General Kane of the Pentagon, Miller of the White House, Susan Wiles of the White House, Rubio, and Hegseth, Witkoff, and Kushner. That's a group that were on the other side of the table in Miami, in Mar-a-Lago. It's not a negotiating group. It's a reassurance for Zelensky. So there are a few of the military facts on the ground since the meeting with Zelensky, since Radcliffe briefed Trump. Now, what are the political facts here? Well, we understand that Trump isn't likely to have authorized personally an attack on Putin, but he might have authorized an attack on the Dalgia-Barodi complex as a nuclear bunker. My sources, Russian sources, believe that it's the US NATO aim to build an Iron Dome air defense for the Ukraine for the future. That's what the Russian side believes the US is committed to in the long term. At the same time, we've got several other problems that Trump is having in relation, political facts on the ground in relation to the UK and Russia. And these may help explain his flip-flopping. He's failing in the polls to convince American voters that he deserves approval for the way in which he's negotiating the so-called peace settlement. The negative disapproval in relation to the approval of his handling of Ukraine-Russia negotiations is widening. His overall job approval is remaining high and negative. He's failing. And domestically, he's also failing. You've seen that the Stephen Miller operation to put the military in control of Democratic voter cities, the military are being pulled out. Portland, Chicago, and Los Angeles have been evacuated by the military. That particular enterprise has also failed to deliver improved voter support for Trump. So a political fact on the ground is the man is failing as he goes into this year's 2026 midterm elections. There are factions on the Russian side too. And in this particular incident, the way it has been handled by Foreign Minister Lavrov, there are certain signals that we should understand. When it was Foreign Minister Lavrov who announces the event and says, as a result of this event, the Russian negotiating position must be revised. What does that mean? Well, it means in Russian factional politics, not that the Russian side's going to stop negotiating. Of course not. The Russian side has no interest in triggering any event that toughens their negotiating stance. They can say it, and they have been saying it. What Lavrov is saying in factional terms in Moscow is that the faction representing Russian business, the oligarch faction, represented by Kirill Dmitriev, a regular negotiator with Witkoff in Miami, and together with Ushakov on the telephone with Witkoff. This is the group that wants to negotiate economic cooperation, big deals, money for the Trump family, money for the son-in-law on the other side of the table. the Russian view is this is a money law for the one thing, the one consistency they know Trump can be relied on: money. The man wants always more of it. And this Dmitriev's role has been to lure the negotiating side of Trump to an agreement on Russian terms because it will pay off well. So we can come back to this in a minute, but we need to understand the political facts on the ground are factional on both sides. Now, what are the strategic consequences? I'm flipping pages so as not to confuse myself, let alone you. What are the strategic consequences here? Well, let me ask you these questions. Think about them. If the CIA and John Radcliffe are telling the truth, and if Trump believes it, then no agreement on Russian terms is possible in the weeks ahead. If they're telling the truth and the Russian side don't believe them because it's not the truth, then US security guarantees that are a crucial part of the settlement of the war, security guarantees for the demilitarized zone, security guarantees for no aggression from the Ukrainian side, US security guarantees on which any peace agreement would depend are worthless. Worthless. That's if the CIA is telling the truth that Russia faked this attack. If the GRU and Admiral Kostyakov are telling the truth, and the attack was targeted either on the president personally or the nuclear bunker, that confirms no agreement on US security guarantees or anything else the Trump side offers at the table can be relied on. They are liars. Their assurances are worthless. They're not interested in peace. They want war. And worse, from a Russian point of view, if Trump authorized in general terms or in specific terms an operation to attack a Russian nuclear command control bunker, that always triggers Russia's nuclear retaliation doctrine. They're attacking the capacity to reply to a nuclear attack. And it triggers nuclear retaliation as well as conventional retaliation, as in the nuclear Russian doctrine. So then if those two strategic consequences aren't serious enough, here's another one. The US has messaged the Kremlin by this act: if Kostyakov and GRU are telling the truth, and not whether or not whatever the targeting was exactly, the US has sent a message to the Kremlin that next time it might send not 91 drones, all of which were shot down, but what if it sends 291 drones the next time? What message does that send to Russia of the US readiness to test Russia's capacity to withstand an attack on its nuclear deterrent capability? And what can Russia send back to the US, to Trump, for deterrence? Is Russia to retaliate so forcefully that, or is it to create some capacity to deter the American side from allowing a Ukrainian, Anglo, British, NATO combination that is required to mount such a massive attack as already occurred, or an even more massive attack for the future? Does that mean a major, major Russian retaliation? Well, my sources are saying not yet. The reason is that, as we've just explained, each side is calling the other a liar, except the Russians are much more polite about it. The US has insulted the Russian side by sending a captain to meet an admiral, and has called the Russian account lies in the New York Times, the New York Post, and what have you. So the Russian side says, look, we know what happened. We know the Americans know what happened, and we've publicly shown them, and the rest of the world, we've shown them we have the evidence. We will delay retaliation for a month, for a couple of weeks to the end of the month, to see if Trump really does want to come to terms or not.
John, I
Don't
am
take
mystified.
your hat off, Christ, Jamal.
I am mystified by. Okay, just to piggyback for a bit. Early on, when all of these oil wars were taking place, my channel was pointing out this is obviously the United States with Trump trying to get leverage.
Yes.
The New York Times seems to be befuddled by this. It was like, oh, hey, apparently the US was trying to get leverage working with the CIA in these terrorist attacks, as Trump was pretending to be a negotiator.
Yes.
Why are the Russians still taking this? I'm an American. I live here. I know how psychopathic the people in leadership are. What don't they get? Like, what am I missing out of this? These two things don't seem to match. It should be obvious that the United States or US president is going to do any and everything in his power to gain some sort of leverage over the Russians. He is not their friend. He's not a peacemaker. And yet, over and over again, they keep giving this benefit of the doubt that I don't quite understand how it's deserved.
It looks like the benefit of the doubt. And the way President Putin expresses it, it sounds like the benefit of the doubt. But let's, again, not confuse the military facts on the ground from the political facts. On the one hand, President Putin has always to speak to his electorate first. And the Russian electorate, which I've tried to explain in the Dances with Bears website, if folks want to go to the polling details and the analysis, there's a very strong majority opinion among Russian voters that Russia must do everything possible to negotiate a peace settlement. And President Putin must do everything possible to protect the army from casualties. So peacemaking is a domestic political priority first. At the same time, the same public opinion polls show that Russians don't trust the United States, but was prepared in January to give Trump the benefit of the doubt. And it takes time and also guidance from the Kremlin to determine whether he deserves the benefit of the doubt. Like you said, the Russian voters can be persuaded of what you've just said. The man's a violent psychopath. They can be persuaded because it's true. Yeah. On the other hand, comparing Trump's position to Biden's position, the Russian side, the Russian voter, the man in the street on the one hand, and the factions around the Kremlin on the other, have to say to themselves, Trump is an opportunity with lots of liabilities. Compared to Biden, he's a better bet to achieve some form of settlement, which would be beneficial to our people, to our security interests. And so that's why they keep referring to the understandings of Anchorage, Alaska. When President Putin took half the time allocated, was to be 4 hours. Trump couldn't stand it for more than 2 hours and then couldn't even sit at the lunch. He had to rush home. after making a press conference with, I think, Sean Hannity of Fox News. Okay. So, nope. The man has very short attention span. He can't negotiate. He can't. He negotiates, as you correctly said, Jamal, with leverage, with violence, with extortionist methods, gang methods. Okay. But the big but, to answer your question, Jamal, is from the Russian side, he's a better bet than the previous gang wars. And in gang wars, what do? You explore till there's no alternative but to go on fighting, the possibility of reaching a peace deal. And if Trump flip-flops, that's an opportunity the Russian side sees. This is what makes this event so important, because it's, in my opinion, a clearer illustration of the factions on each side and the facts on the ground and the conflict of who's telling the truth. I can't remember I mean, there have been plenty of so-called Ukrainian US-assisted attacks or British-assisted attacks on Russian targets, but this is different.
John, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry. I thought you were going to say something else. You said this is different. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought something was
After I saw your head coming off, Jamal, I think it's definitely your turn.
No, that's perfectly fine. Okay, so this is different. And the difference in this, from your point of view, is that for all intents and purposes, both sides are effectively calling each other liars. And this is the CIA and the Russian military effectively at odds over this issue.
Yes.
Is this something new, though? I mean, the fact that Russia is effectively saying that the U.S. is complicit if they don't accept the let's say, information that they have been given, is that new? I mean, under normal circumstances, Russia's been trying to kind of carve out, let's say, space for Trump to make him as if he's a thing unto himself. But they're effectively confronted with, as you point out, okay, you've insulted us by sending this low bar guy in comparison to the generals who we've sent in this. You're calling us liars. There's that. You went after our nuclear triad. And in the exact same week that this took place, the New York Times published a piece that Trump was working with the CIA in order to attack Russian targets while pretending to negotiate. Yes. So it's like all of this stuff is happening at the exact same time. Do you see a change in the way Russia is engaging this, or they're just going to continue with business as usual?
Not business as usual. Let's recap a bit. It was Foreign Minister Lavrov who made the announcement. And it's Lavrov who has visibly indicated he does not think Kirill Dmitriev's approach to the negotiations will be effective. He's basically saying, yes, we understand you can bribe Trump, his son, his sons, his son-in-law. Everybody in the world knows you can bribe Trump. And the New York Times has just issued a handy map showing how the bribes work. They left out the bribes between Israel and the United States, but they put in detail how the bribes work between the UAE, Qatar, and the Saudi interests, and the Trump family, the Vitkov family, the Lutnick family, and so on. So everybody in the world knows this. But in Russian terms, there has been a very significant difference of how to exploit the Trump susceptibility to money and achieve short-term Russian goals or medium-term security and a relief from the war on terms that Russia will accept. So what's new is, in my view, dramatically new, Foreign Minister Lavrov is saying, I'd say, Dmitriev's approach isn't working. Look, you can throw money at this guy, he'll take it, and then he'll flip against you the next day. There's no point in bribing this guy. Either he runs a gang and he himself will take the bribe and then flip. And I can tell you, the Russian side tried that with Hillary Clinton back in 2008, when she through the family took a significant bribe from Oleg Deripaska to agree to the Russian buyout of the Opel car division in Germany, Opel and Vauxhall, when General Motors was bankrupt and was selling those divisions off. Clinton took the money. I've spelled it out more than once in print. And then she flipped and betrayed the bribe. That makes Russians very angry. It usually makes most people angry who run businesses on bribery. So Putin has a particular experience of paying bribes to senior US officials, and they betray their word. That makes Putin very angry, as angry towards Trump possibly as he was towards Hillary Clinton, except that for the time being, that what we have is a factional realignment possibility in Moscow that will, as it were, minimize Dmitriev's persuasiveness that through the business means, the money means, business to business, economic cooperation, relief of sanctions. We could go on and on about what this stuff is supposed to be, including a tunnel between Alaska under the Bering Strait. All of this is a lure to achieve terms on the ground in the Ukraine. And Lavrov is saying, as the General Staff have been saying, as the intelligence services have been saying, the US is not willing that Trump himself says one thing, but the Europeans persuade him of another thing, or that whatever Trump says can't be relied on. And if you can't rely on any US security guarantee, you for sure can't rely on Chancellor Merz's military aims against Russia. Therefore, we have to fight on. No possibility of a pause based on security guarantees that are worthless. So if that's the change that's been triggered by this event, that's new. Mm-hmm. Not surprising, but new. It's a change in political balance on the Moscow side. On the US side, I'm not the expert on the US side, and I wish we could hear from those retired CIA men who appear on podcasts to explain more clearly exactly what their old agency's doing here, but they can't and they don't. So I think that what we're seeing on the US side is less new than what we are seeing in factional political terms on the Russian side. But what I have to emphasize is that it is always new when a nuclear warfare threat is manifest, as this was. If the target was a nuclear command control complex, which always comes with presidential residences, that should be understood, then it's an attack on nuclear assured deterrence. And that brings us closer to nuclear war. And if the Russians feel, and that's why Kostyakov was there handing the data over, that the Trump is so careless, so violent, or can be so easily persuaded to make this kind of demonstration as the June attack, Operation Spiderweb, on the Tupolev nuclear bombers. If Trump can be persuaded that to let the Ukrainians act in this way. If US targeting intelligence, satellite intelligence, live data for the maneuver of the drones, all of those things that the US continues to provide the Ukraine, that the CIA continues to provide Ukraine. If the Russian side is convinced that Trump is now no better than Biden, that's new too. And if we're on the nuclear brink again, the question becomes a new one. What level of deterrence does Russia have to exhibit? Not talk about red lines, no discussions about deployment of the Oreshniki in Belarus. No, action, not talk, action. What action is deterrent for the Russian side to implement now? And what I've said is cautionary, not yet. Not now, not yet.
So you think that they're going to wait that month? I'm telling you, the U.S. is not going to change their point of view.
I don't know that it'll. What you can already see is the Russian side's waiting. How long a wait depends on what the Trump side does next. Now, what are the signals for all of us to watch? Well, something that wasn't new that came out of Miami. That was an agreement between the Ukrainian side and the US side to create two working groups. Remember working groups? We talked about this 6 months ago. Secretary of State Rubio agreed with Foreign Minister Lavrov in Kuala Lumpur, July 16, on 3 working groups: military, that's territories, definition of territories, definition of weapons and so forth, to be permitted on the Ukrainian battlefield after peace, military security, diplomatic, economic cooperation. It's unclear what the 3 were back in July. It's not clear exactly what the 2 are now. What is clear is there was an agreement on working groups and it never happened. Never happened. So if working groups aren't now required, if they don't actually operate, then the Russian side will say the Americans are not only unreliable liars and Trump is aggressive, we now have to deter their future action in a way we haven't. We've allowed and been patient. You began by saying, why is Putin so patient? And I hope I've explained both the tactical and the political requirements for being patient. I better stop. I think I've explained why a wait is necessary now and why we need to talk calmly. Threats don't work.
One of the other issues that you mentioned was effectively the energy grid attacks that were taking place, where in 2025, the Russians effectively decimated the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. And that at any point over the course of the war, they could have done this, but they made a choice not to do this, but to do this in 2025. Does that indicate to you that, let's say, their temperament is hardening on this idea of negotiations, that for all intents and purposes, for all of the talk, that something is clicked, that they realize the U.S. is deal adverse, A, and B, we need to put Ukraine out of the war. And one of the ways to do this is to go after the energy infrastructure now, because we don't believe a deal is in the making.
You make a good point. The history of the electric war is of periodic attacks since October 2022.
Right.
And exactly as you said, Jamal, they were not followed up and they allowed, I recently did a piece in Dances with Bears. They allow the gap between the series of attacks was so wide and long, the Ukrainians were able to repair and replace equipment. There was a failure to be comprehensive, yes, a failure to be comprehensive and systematic in destroying, turning the lights out and making the entire country dysfunctional, incapable of being commanded. That was a Putin decision. It was calculated to be, we're warning you that this is our capability. So we're giving you the chance to negotiate a settlement short of our having to completely destroy your capabilities and bring you to capitulation. Second, as Trump came in, you'll remember, there was a proposal for a reciprocal moratorium on energy infrastructure attacks. Putin accepted, Zelensky rejected, and the US didn't compel Zelensky to accept. So from February on, there was President Putin's foot very firmly on the brake in demonstrating for what he thought it was worth to Trump that Russia was willing to make this concession in order to achieve a full range of terms for a peace settlement.
Right.
Now, the Ukrainian response, backed by US satellite and live drone and fixed wing intelligence in the Black Sea, for example, British intelligence, NATO intelligence, backed by all of the powers, it's obvious that the Ukraine has escalated its attacks on energy infrastructure. And with Allied help, including the CIA, military intelligence, have extended and escalated their reach, as far south as the south coast of Crete, where the attack on the Kendal tanker was made southwest of the coast of Crete. So there were other incidents in the Mediterranean. The attack on the Ursa Major, which was carrying nuclear equipment to North Korea, was sunk by a torpedo, a subsea drone. It's not clear. That was sunk a year ago. That operation wasn't Ukrainian. It was Anglo-American NATO. So the war at sea has been going on very actively and against the Russian energy infrastructure of trade, the trade infrastructure, so against the so-called shadow fleet, the phantom fleet, the other fleet, the fleet that represents roughly 1/3 of the tanker fleet of the world. What am I trying to say? What we have here is a demonstration on the adversary side that no concession, no restraint on the Russian side with respect to the Ukraine's energy infrastructure will persuade the Europeans, Ukraine, or the US to come to Russian terms for a peace settlement.
Agreed. And the attacks on the shipping has been pretty extraordinary. I mean, going all the way from Venezuela shipping, as you point out,
Yes.
going after North Korean ships, Russian ships, Chinese ships. Yes. There seems to be this kind of full spectrum, let's say, assault on these countries that are opposition to, let's say, NATO in this case. Especially the Crete one. The Crete one was extraordinary. Especially considering, there could have been severe consequences as a result of that particular attack. What do you think?
The vessel was empty. The vessel was not carrying oil. It was on its return from the delivery of oil to Indian discharge port. It had come then westward through the Suez Canal, was heading westward through the Mediterranean to return to Russia, probably an oil loading port like Primorsk. We can go through the details, but rather than test everybody's patience with the details, although the big picture is always in the details, what we can say is the war at sea is part of the war against Russian trade. The war against Russian trade and the war against China's trade, the war against North Korea and Iran's trade, the sanctions war is fought out at sea as the world's fleets divide into two. It's not the case that there are few phantom ships. My count, the marine media account, the market account, is that there might be a total. I got the numbers in my head, and if there are experts watching us, I'd be happy to see any difference. Roughly speaking, there are about 8,000 to 9,000 tankers in the world carrying oil. Of those, roughly 1,500 tankers are operated by the top 10 commercial fleets that are Western flagged, Western based, led by the French, the Norwegians, the Americans, and the Danes. 1,500. More than 3,500 are the so-called shadow fleet, the black fleet, the phantom fleet. That's the Russian fleet, or the fleet designed to evade the war at sea imposed by the other side. So roughly speaking, if you figure the phantoms add up to 3,500 and the total's 8,000-ish, then you've got about 4,500 on the, let's call it the US NATO side. It's not evenly matched, but it's close. World trade is broken up into blocks by the sanctions war. The war at sea is a form of enforcing by attacking ships that break up of the world's trade, the purpose of which is to damage severely Russia's capacity to fight on, Iran's capacity to defend itself, Venezuela's capacity to prevent regime change, and so on. You know the reasons, you know the objectives, but
right.
The fact is, two oil fleets have become are opposed to each other. They're not quite the same size, but one isn't a phantom and the other a genuine fleet. They're roughly equally matched, but one side is now using arms to attack the other side. That's what the war at sea is now.
I guess this could be the last question for this. If it's clear as day, beyond the clarity to me, the clarity to a lot of people, that the U.S. is completely deal adverse.
I'm sorry, I missed
it's
what?
Deal adverse, meaning the U.S.
Yes.
is not in the business of making a deal. This is all about trying to gain some kind of mince three of sorts. I mean, and let's say the attacks against either Putin's residents increase. What do you think that definitive muscular action would be in order to try to get across seriousness that this is unacceptable?
Let me backtrack a bit. It's my interpretation that, and it's my Russian sources' interpretation, that basically Trump doesn't care whether the war goes on, so long as two things. One, he makes money either way, and he thinks he is. And on present counts, he gets richer by the day. He makes money by selling the arms to the Europeans who transfer them to the Ukraine. He's proposed through Kushner and Witkoff to Dmitriev to privatize the frozen central bank reserves, 300 billion euros worth, and turn them into a US managed investment fund. And guess how much money will fall off that truck into whose pockets? Trump always makes money. This is fundamental. Second, he doesn't care if the fighting goes on condition he's not perceived to lose the war. He cannot, certainly not in a midterm election year, have his Kabul moment, have his Saigon 75 moment. He must insist that it's not his war, therefore not his defeat, if that's what's happening. On the other hand, underneath him, Radcliffe, Hegseth, General Kane, Rubio, and the others want and believe they can win. They can win by, they think, damaging the Russian economy and forcing on Putin a degree of casualties, a degree of economic dislocation and destruction. They think that's good enough to win for the time being for them. So this is the structure, in my opinion, of how the US is, as you said, Jamal, deal averse. It's making money and it's preserving votes. Trump is win, win, win. He keeps repeating it. It can never be lose, 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 certainly not in an election year.
So your point is a show of force doesn't matter.
Pardon?
So your point is, correct me if I'm wrong, that a show of force doesn't really matter. That for all intents and purposes. A short pause. No. A show of force doesn't matter. That for all intents and purposes, a show of force against Ukraine in the case of Russia saying this is unacceptable, it's not going to change U.S. behavior in the conflict. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
I agree. I agree. If we begin with your question, and pardon me for wandering away from it.
No.
You asked what kind of retaliation would be to be expected if negotiations with Trump get no better than they are at the moment, if the working groups are as much a failure in January as they were since July. What does, and my point at the beginning was Russia now must consider that if the US is complicit, as you said, Jamal, at the beginning, in this attack, and this attack was either at the president or, if that's denied, at the nuclear bunker, the nuclear command control system, what retaliation is necessary to deter the United States from doing it again with a bigger swarm, some of whose elements might get through? Is there a retaliation against the Ukraine that would be effective? For example, should the Russian side be contemplating decapitation on the grounds that Zelensky's just been proved to have attempted to attack President Putin in his residence? Now, there was an attack back in 2023, as you remember. 2 small drones hit the top of the Capitol building. Almost certainly they were fired from the Moscow suburbs, and they weren't a convincing demonstration of a capacity to do more. This is a more convincing capacity to do more. How do you retaliate against that? Take the Indian example. When India faced a Pakistani directed terrorist attack in the Punjab, it launched a whole war and destroyed almost all Pakistan's command control capacity to go on fighting and mobilize its own weapons. That's what the Indian side did. Would Russia go that far? Well, maybe we better leave our audience in suspense. I'm saying there's a good political and political military argument that if you don't retaliate with deterrent effect, the US side will escalate. Trump will say the timing wasn't right then, but maybe it'll be now. Remember, Trump said, after all, it's not a good time now. You shouldn't hit Putin in his house now. But then on the other hand, it's offensive in the same way that the Russian side's offensive. He was stumbling a bit with the words, as he usually does, but the mental construct's clear. He thinks one act of war deserves another act of war. The Russian side says, no, this is a terrorist act. We are not at war with the United States. We're not at war with NATO. We will modify and modulate our response in the hope of persuading the other side that we are all better off with mutual security. So we're passing a threshold just at the New Year turn of whether, come back to your question, whether the Russian side is coming to the conclusion that there is no alternative but to a major retaliation whose outcome speaks much more loudly than the announcement of red lines and tit for tat.
Wow. John, this is terrifying. Like this is on the brink of, it's an escalation. I mean, there's no other way to call it.
I believe so, Jamal. I mean, it's an unfortunate feature of the universe of podcast media that one needs, that some folks try to exaggerate the dangers of the moment. If I've seen World War III tagging a podcast 100 times, it's there to attract, it's clickbait in our universe, and it's regrettable. So I'm not clicking that bait. Don't bite it out there. Don't bite. The issue is different. The issue is, what do the facts on the ground tell us about the strategic consequences? We can only repeat it. If the US side is calling Russia a liar and Russia understands the US is a liar, we are talking about an attack of 91 drones against a nuclear command control. Is the US saying we'll send 200 next time? And what does the Russian side say in response to that? Don't do it? No, the Russian side is not going to say that.
John Helmer, Dances with Bears. John, you have my deepest appreciation. Happy New Year to you. Thank you for joining me. I always appreciate having you. The audience loves you. You be safe, man. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Jamal. Thanks.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Shout out to John. Shout out to John. We're going to go from one damn good guest to another one. The man himself, Ted Rall. Happy New Year's, Ted. How you doing, man?
Happy New Year, Jamal. I'm good. Just enjoying the cold weather and the amazing, even though I know it's mostly for show, but the amazing spectacle of a brand new New York mayor quoting radical leftists at his inauguration. I don't know if he'll do what radical leftists want to do, but he certainly, is willing to let people around him talk like one,
Yeah, I saw the nomination of Mamdani. I saw it. I was paying attention to it. And apparently, correct me if I'm wrong, Bernie Sanders was given the benediction.
Bernie Sanders provided the benediction in his holy mittens on a very cold day. I do as a professional graphic artist, however, want to say that Mayor Mamdani, if you're reelected, you could call a professional graphic artist to design your banner. I would have done better for you in 10 minutes on Photoshop. But anyway, just saying.
Yeah, I feel you're feeling some kind of way about it. When I software engineering, people have these kind of crappy websites. It's like, dude, I could have done better than that. What did you make of that? I mean, like, what was the response to Mamdani taking office? Is there hope? Well, I get the sense that there's probably going to be hope. There's going to be this idea of, oh my God, something's going to change. And I get the sense that you're very skeptical of this. You've been around the block a few times on this. And it's like, okay, dude, I've seen this before. But is
Right.
that the sense in New York? Like this Obama-esque isolated into a state with these expectations of Mamdani changing something, especially if he's talking like a leftist. He's like, we're going to believe in collectivism. That was one of the statements that
Right.
he came up with. Okay. What are your thoughts? I know
Well-
you're skeptical of this, but
Well,
I guess my first question is, what is New York thinking about him being sworn in? Let's go with that.
Well, you have to be skeptical about it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously. But okay, so most New Yorkers, I mean, because Obama did happen, people do know, they know what it's like to have their expectations disappointed. And so, but I think generally speaking, people are they're excited. They are like, this is so great. It's a change. The symbolism of it, at least, is really great.
Yeah.
There's among liberal New Yorkers, there's some fear that he'll screw up, and then provide fodder for those who say, well, if he failed, then like there's no future for an AOC or an Ilhan Omar or those kind of people.
Right.
And of course, obviously, New York has genuine problems, and there's fears that those problems just can't and won't be addressed within the existing system. But generally speaking, people just loved the optics. They were like, it's so great to see this young dude who doesn't look like previous mayors, and his beautiful wife who doesn't look like previous spouses of mayors. And so, it's sort of like, it was more of a celebration of the city and its ethnic and other diversity than it really was, I think. I mean, it was also a political coming out party for the Democratic Socialists. They owned it. Basically Mamdani and the people around him decided they're going to call us a bunch of commies, so we're going to call ourselves a bunch of commies, which is exactly the smart thing to do.
Yes.
Because they are going to do that. So you should always just own it. People stopped calling me anti-American after I published a book called The Anti-American Manifesto. You own it, then nobody calls you that. If you call yourself,
run, they chase you. That's the thing, right? If you run, they're going to chase you.
Don't run away from those monikers. So he did that. I thought I had specific critiques of things that were done, the way it was done and said, and all that. I mean, one thing that always amazes me is he learned one lesson from Donald Trump, which is come out of the gate strong. We've already seen some executive orders coming out of City Hall in the last 24 hours that are interesting. There's 2 new housing initiatives. One to basically take an executive order to evaluate. This is a Ted Rall idea. Evaluate all public property that's either vacant or abandoned for possible housing. That's right.
Yeah.
So maybe he watches me sometimes.
Yeah.
And then another one was an anti-Ted Rall idea, which was let's make it easier for developers to build new housing without without as many regulatory impediments. My view is that we have tons of housing. There is no housing crisis. Housing is like the De Beers cartel. It's fake. It's like, when you have warehoused housing, you don't have a housing crisis, you have a warehousing crisis.
Right.
But anyway, the thing is, but he decided to go public and private on that. It's still bold and interesting. And then the other thing is he got rid of the definition that the Adams administration put in about the definition of anti-Semitism as being, including anti-Zionism. He got rid of a bunch of those things that were, sops to the Zionist lobby. So that's great. Again, it's like I'm owning it. Like you're saying that, I'm not pro, but he didn't get rid of Adams' anti-Semitism prevention office. He left that in place. So that was interesting, kind of like saying, like, I'm willing to be against, we will continue to go after real anti-Semitism. We just won't go after the fake anti-Zionist kind.
Yeah.
So that was cool. But we'll see. It's only been 24 hours, but not even. But he's going to be. But I thought also the production. This always kind of drives me crazy. Now Donald Trump, he understands showmanship, I think, better than almost any other politician. And one of the things that is really annoying, Republicans do it too, but Democrats and liberals do it more, which is larding up a ceremony with every Tom, Dick, and Harry who's ever been associated with the cause, even remotely. We're going to have a poet. We're going to have a singer. We're going to have the Queensboro president. We're going to.
That's a leftist thing, though, right? That's more of a leftist
thing. We have to let everyone talk. My view is, what I would do is the audience isn't here. The audience is on television, okay, and on the internet. So it's my view would be have Mamdani come out at noon, do his or 1 o'clock, do the inauguration. He can do his thing, and if people want to stick around and listen to all the jibber jabber, and by the way, it's 25 degrees. It's cold.
Yeah,
I was worried Bernie was going to kick over and die. It's it's not really right to make people sit 2.5 hours in the snow. Unable to jump up and down. I was just this is ridiculous. You have so much wasted of time. Keep the ceremony lean and mean. The presidential inauguration isn't this long. It's just ridiculous. So that was unfortunate. You had a lot of boring shit in there that you did not need to have. And by the way, oh my God, that female singer, she was the absolute worst. But anyway, that was just.
Oh, I have to look her up. That's awesome. What you said, she sucked.
I was literally afraid that she might be dead, but you wouldn't be able to tell because her lips literally didn't move while she sung.
Oh, that's not good. That's not good. Well, we'll see. I'm one of those people that try to give the benefit of the doubt, but I'm terrified that he fucks it up, because if he F it up, there was you would know this. You may know this. Richard Nixon. There's in some of the old audio footage. I don't know if that's right. Audio recordings of Richard Nixon. He's talking about this political ploy behind the scenes where he brought this woman into office. And Richard Nixon knew she wasn't right for the office. He knew it. And he's bragging to whoever he's talking to on the tapes, I'm going to be seen as a progressive president. She's going to fail and she's going to set women back for a decade. And he's bragging about this, this is great. I hope he doesn't F this up, because if he does, everything that they've ever said about him, everything that they've ever said about a guy who calls himself a lefty. And again, I'm saying calls himself a lefty because that's going to have effects on people who are actually legitimate lefties. Oh, that's the
problem.
Yeah.
Because lefties don't really get many chances at the brass ring.
Exactly.
And this is one. So here's the thing, right? I do think that he brought in a lot of super experienced people who've been in the de Blasio administration. And I saw former Mayor de Blasio sitting there, and I just thought he started with a lot of promise too. We were all very hopeful for him. He was a democratic socialist. He was a lefty, and it didn't work out. And so the problem with bringing, if you're Mayor Thomas and you come in and you're okay, maybe I should bring in some people who know the ropes. The problem is these are people who know the ropes, right? So they're connected to everything, and that's good, but that's also bad because
you're trying to break the wheel.
It's there, it's the same old thing, right? And so you're not draining the swamp, and there is a Lower Manhattan swamp as well as a DC swamp, to say the least. And so you definitely, the risk is that you don't have people at the table who are just sort of saying, just because we always did it that way doesn't mean we need to keep doing it that way. And so there's, I think, look, the ace in the hole for Mamdani is to find money. And if he can, you can have a successful mayoralty if the cash is rolling in. Giuliani was mayor from 93 to 01, during the biggest economic expansion in U.S. history. He sits in he was the mayor of a city with 2 stock exchanges and a commodities exchange. Of course, there was money rolling into the city of New York. Of course, he was able to pave roads and and make things work better, obviously. And crime went down because the economy was better. But Mamdani needs to scare up some cash. He kind of signaled this during his inauguration, that he might be going after real estate and Wall Street, which is exactly what I would do. He's not beholden to them. They didn't bring him to this dance. They didn't want him to be at this dance. So it's kind of like he owes them nothing. So he can go to war. The only way he can govern successfully, right? Because, you and I have talked about this, the 3 loci of power in New York City, the cops, real estate, and Wall Street. He doesn't have any of them. If you don't have any of those, you have to govern like Donald Trump. Donald Trump's base of power is the American people. He doesn't always remember that, but it's his right-wing base, right? The Republicans who put him in office. When he goes to them directly, that's where his power comes from. That's why he does the rallies and all that. That is not, if Mamdani sticks to that, if he follows that, and he seems to be very interested in certain aspects of the way Trump does things, then he could succeed. But, selling out is always the more likely scenario because that's what people do when they're in the system. They sell out.
Let me let's move to Epstein for a bit. I've been sitting here fascinated by some of the reporting that has finally been coming out about Epstein. I think it was NBC that came out with a report effectively saying the footage that they received from the releases brings up questions about what actually happened to Epstein, which I'm like, well, I don't think Epstein killed himself. I've been one of those people who said it from the beginning. I don't think Epstein killed himself, right?
No way.
And now NBC is like, hey, maybe he didn't kill himself. Well, at the very least, they wouldn't go that far, right? They would say that the footage that was released is very dodgy. There were supposed to be like 12 cameras, 11 of them are gone. One of them doesn't give any information about whether or not when somebody went into the cell. And so this is kind of an open-ended thing now where it's not what they say it is, which brings up more questions because it's not what they say it is. Then you get
that's that weasel phrase that the media likes to use. Raises questions. Well, you're raising the questions, but okay. All right, anyway.
Yeah, right. They're raising the questions on us. But beforehand, they were definitive. Epstein obviously killed himself. And now it's like, well, this now raises questions about whether or not he killed himself. Well, yeah. Then you get all of this other footage where they are blacking out names of people who seem to be directly related to getting favors, or let's say underage favors, quote unquote, from Epstein. Meaning they're hiding the Johns. And the Johns is the thing that everybody effectively wants to see. Meaning all of this other stuff, okay, fair enough, interesting connections, right? You may be hiding the connections with Israel, all that stuff. Fair enough. Who are the Johns? And they've been blacking out all of these names to the point where Rakana have come out and said, look, you're breaching the law. Like this is not what we agreed upon in regards to the law. What has been taking place in the United States on this? Like, what has been, I guess, the zeitgeist? I'm not there, so I can't feel the zeitgeist. I can only see it through social media. Mm-hmm. But has there been outrage over this idea of them throwing their bodies to protect effectively pedophiles?
Well, I think that like what the Trump administration and the other people who have a vested interest, and they're in both parties, in the Epstein files not remaining redacted. Is basically they've been trying to drag their feet and create a sense of exhaustion in this, and hoping that other stories and other concerns wipe this off the headlines and out of people's minds. Now, that was obviously the thinking when Speaker Johnson adjourned the House early back in July. And basically was like, well, we'll kick this can down the road. But by September, clearly that hadn't worked. Now, of course, we're just coming out of about roughly a week and a half of holidays and family distraction. And I would say that for the last 2-3, there was the initial release. No one, I think, was really surprised that the administration and the DOJ were not forthcoming, or that not all the documents were even released in the redacted form. And then I think now there was a wait and see attitude on the part of the people who care about this, most of whom are on the right in the MAGA base, right? And so now we're coming out of the holidays. I would say if it were right now, Trump could breathe easy. But right now isn't going to be right now as of Monday, January 5th, when the holidays are over. So I don't know what happens going forward. If things remain as they are right now, maybe from the point of view of the pedophiles and their enablers, the worst has passed, and maybe there's nothing much to worry about except for the incompetent redacting that happened, right? And like the fact that people can find out whose names those are. And I just would say, to put a finer point on it, I don't want to just know who may be a John. I also want to know who was there, who maybe didn't touch any young girls. But I want to know the whole thing, because even the people who were just there are somehow, they're enablers, they're part of this. We should know. I mean, these are public records. There's no reason not to know. So I want it all out, right? I mean, I think a lot of people feel that way. I think my guess is that this isn't going away, and all you need is a few people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's kind of become the martyr of this, the Epstein Files movement, and people like that, and Thomas Massey, who's still in the trenches. If all you need is a few people like that, maybe if we can get a senator like a Rand Paul to be more aggressive, it's gonna the press will wake up, social media will wake up again. Right now it's a little asleep, but everything's a little asleep right now. So it's hard to say.
Are you seeing people make excuses for Trump on this, like his own base? Because as you point out, a lot of this, the Democrats had the opportunity to release these files. They never did. And so, it's kind of a hard pill for them to come out later and says, hey, we actually really do care about this now that Donald Trump is in office. It's like, okay, get that out. But MAGA did seem to care about it. In fact, Donald Trump's polling on some level, part of the reason that he took the hit and part of the reason that he even signed it was because he realized he was taking such a hit from it. So do you see MAGA making excuses for Trump on this? I mean, how do you throw your body to protect a pedophile? That seems to blow my mind on this. But do you see that happening?
Well, it's clearly happening in some, the MAGA is splitting. We talked about the split between MAGA and the corporate Republicans. That split is a Grand Canyon, and it kind of always was. And it's just more evident than ever. But within the MAGA movement, of course, there's like blind loyalty to the president. Just, protect him no matter what. These are the same people who validated his gross statements about Rob Reiner. And said, well, you can't really blame him. I mean, come on. I mean, there's people, how it is. It's like political partisans will make an excuse for their guy no matter what they do. And so that's exactly what's happening here. So sure, there's people making excuses. But there's also a high number who are not. And of course, it's a bell curve. There's people in the middle who are sort of like, they could be persuaded either to turn a blind eye and out of loyalty to Trump, or to care more about it and think, hey, children were victimized here. This could have been my kid. This could have been me. I don't think we should let it pass. I think in the end, though, you and I both know how these cycles go. The fact is, tens of millions of Americans really want to know what's in those files. Yes. And whenever there's a cover up, whether in real or fake, right, perceived, like about the Wuhan lab, or about or about 9/11, or the JFK assassination, or UFOs, or Watergate, whenever there's Iran-Contra, when there's a sense like these fuckers are hiding shit, and I don't know what it is, but the more they hide it, the more I want to know what's in there. That becomes really hard to resist, and it is probably not wise to keep, basically prolonging the pain. Like, rip off the Band-Aid, do a mass documents dump, and be done with it, right? But and shit'll come out, and people will be like, "Oh my God!" And a few people who are allies of yours, Mr. President, will be burned. That's just how it is. But that's the least bad scenario from his point of view. I don't think Trump personally did anything bad. I mean, we know MTG, and I believe her, said that Trump told her that basically some friends of his would be hurt if these documents came out, and that's why he doesn't want them out. I believe that, and I think that's true.
I'm skeptical. I mean, would Trump really tell her?
Ever come out, or
no? I'm skeptical that Donald Trump is not involved. Like, would Donald Trump really ever go to MTG and said, "Hey, man, I'm up to my neck in pedophiles, and so I don't want it to come out"? Or would he say, "Hey, some of my friends will be hurt, so I don't want it to come out"? Which one is more likely to be true? Meaning, which one do you see most likely him telling her? Meaning, if Donald Trump was directly involved and intimate in these files, do you think he would ever tell MTG that he's in the files and that his issue is the fact that he's a pedophile? Or at the very least, well, yeah, that he's a pedophile.
Well, not that he's a pedophile, that some of his friends would be hurt. Okay. No, I don't think Donald Trump is a pedophile. So I just don't think it's like I just don't believe it. Could be anything. It's possible, but I just don't think so.
He was friends with the guy for like 20 years. And Donald Trump knew the guy was messing with kids.
I was friends with a guy who loved every possible drug, and I never used any. I mean, the point is, it's like you can be friends and not share the same interests, right? I mean, for real.
I know, Ted, but drugs and pedophilia is different. How do I justify? I know this guy is putting his penis in a 12-year-old. How do I justify hanging out with this guy and being buddies with this guy, knowing what this guy's predilection is? That's different than, I don't care if my friend uses cocaine. I ain't one of those people that think drugs should be legal, frankly. I don't care if the guy uses LSD. I don't care if he uses mescaline, right? That doesn't bother me in the least. If it becomes annoying to me, I can always leave, right? Pedophilia is different. That's just different. Like, that's a different animal.
Well, it is to you, and maybe it is to me, but I think there are people, I mean, I think to operate at that level, to be like Donald Trump. Think about Donald Trump. He was, his lawyer and buddy and mentor of sorts was Roy Cohn. I mean, think of all the mafiosos he dealt with in the building construction business and development in New York City. Think about like all the sleazebags that he has had to deal with, whether he liked them or not. I mean, it doesn't take long for you to start to feel like, amoral. Like, if you're gonna pick and choose who you're dealing with, like on a day-to-day. I mean, it's kind of like people be doing what people want to do. You can't stop them. It's not, and it's like, it's not people. I mean, someone like Trump is going to say to himself, "I don't really care." It's like, no, I'm not doing it.
So who cares if he fucks kids? Who cares if he's sticking his dick in a 12-year-old? Who cares?
I mean,
that's pretty heavy.
I agree that you should care, and I think, I think, look, I'm really glad that you brought this up, because this is actually the nut of the entire Epstein files thing. This is actually the crux of the matter. The crux of the matter is not whether Trump did it. The crux of the matter is, why did Donald Trump hang out with someone that much and be buddies with him that much, knowing, as he had to have known, his predilections and his behavior? That's actually the moral and political and ethical question that people have, not focused on, because there are so many, secondary and tertiary questions surrounding this. But that's the big one. That's really, truly it. And it's kind of like, let's just assume, for the sake of, let's go with what we know. We don't know what Donald Trump did or didn't do, but we do know what Epstein did and didn't do. And we know that Trump hung out with Epstein. That's really the issue, isn't it?
I mean, Trump and apparently an entire echelon of Hollywood politicos, journalists, financialization people, et cetera, et cetera. Like, it seems that a full branch of upper echelon of society hung out with this guy.
They all knew, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, it's not the first or the last time we've seen this phenomenon. I mean, in all sorts of situations, there have been people who behaved monstrously, and a lot of people knew about it, and nobody said dick. And it's sort of like, I mean, look, Harvey Weinstein, right? I mean, Everybody, it was such a joke in Hollywood that it came up as a part of the monologues during award shows in Hollywood, internationally televised. Everybody knew they were joking about like his predilections.
That's grotesque.
I mean, so like everybody knew. There's a movie called God, what was it called? Oh my God! Well, there was a scandal in Ohio where this gynecologist basically was butchering women.
And he carved his name on the woman, if I'm not mistaken.
And this was I guess it was in the 80s. And I remember it very well because I was from that part of the state and it was on 60 Minutes and all this. Anyway, I used to, see that office on the road when I drove by. Anyway, the point is that every doctor in his community, all the AMA guys, the local, they all made jokes about it. They all thought it was funny. These are doctors. And the Old Boys Network, they all knew. Think about like in any police department, there's always one especially bad cop, and all of his peers always turn a blind eye. There's always in war the guy who commits the atrocities, and the other guys in the unit, they don't say shit. It's human behavior.
Ted Rall, political cartoonist, syndicated column. And no, I agree with you. It's just grotesque. That's all.
It is grotesque. I couldn't possibly agree more. I mean, sometimes I think it's a blessing that people like you and I are like sort of on the outside looking in. We don't get invited to these. I had a friend say like, "Oh, did you ever get invited to an Epstein party because you were in New York during this time?" And I said, "I don't get those kind of fancy invitations."
A puppy party, right?
Yeah.
It's like now it's like, thank God. Like getting invited to the back room.
Yeah, I didn't get invited to any white parties in East Hampton, even though I lived in East Hampton. The point is that like I don't get those kinds of invitations, and it's a blessing, right? Because I've not really been in a position to have to know about something like this and then have to wrestle with two really yucky choices. One is to not say anything and let victims continue to be victimized, and then calling law enforcement, which is also yucky because it's a really unpleasant experience for you as the person who reports it. And then like you get questioned and it's like the whole thing. I haven't had to make that choice. Thank God,
Yeah. Ted Rall, political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, co-host with the one and only Manila Chan on TMI, Too Much Information, also on Deprogram with John Kiriakou. Still at 9 o'clock, Ted? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, we're doing a 2-hour show. John and I are doing a 2-hour show at 9 a.m. To 11 a.m. So, and then TMI comes back on the air on Monday.
Oh, okay. And you and I need to have a phone call.
Yes, we do.
We will meet.
Yeah.
You be safe, man. Have a good one. And Happy New Year, man. Thank you.
See you.
All right. Shout out to Ted Rall. Oh, that's just grotesque. It's grotesque. So through and through grotesque. David Hundeyin will be coming on the show pretty soon. I got to be honest, there's this, when Ted Rall mentioned UFOs, there is a funny, at least I think it's funny, and I guess that's really all that matters right now. There is a funny UFO bit of lore in history. Funny bit of lore in UFO in history. This is in poor taste. It's in poor taste, but I've already mentioned it. This, where is it? Let's see if I can find it. Do I have it? Yes. I think this is it. I don't have it. Damn it. I don't have it. There's a funny UFO thing that Joe Rogan mentioned where there was a fight apparently there was a disagreement about some UFO subject. And a woman pulled a gun out of her vagina in order to threaten the guy who she was arguing with. I was like, whoa, that's intense. That is intense. Let's go to chats. And as I always tell you, thank you for all your chats help make the show what it is. Can't have a show without you. In this case, whether it's views, comments, super chats, Patreon, PayPal, etc. memberships, all of these things help benefit the show. All of these things helps the show keep ticking along. And you have my deepest appreciation for it. That is my spiel. I hate having to give that spiel, so I'm not going to lean on that spiel. But needless to say, you have my appreciation, and thank you for your help to make the show what it is. We have deep green voiceover. Deep green voiceover. I'm assuming that's voiceover. Correct me if I'm wrong. Zoran is not a lefty, especially being bankrolled by the Soros family. I want to be hopeful, but I am a wait and see with caution. That's all you can do, right? How many times can you be burned and still keep running like a useful idiot into the fire, right? After a while, you're going to be like, you know what? That stove is hot. That stove is hot. So I don't blame you in the least. And yeah, as I think I said, I am one of the hardest things to fight is cynicism. It just is. It's easy to be cynical. It is far more difficult to push back against what the world tells you that you should be. And so, yeah, hopeful. Not expecting anything yet. Hopeful. Okay, let's split the baby. Fair enough. Let's see. This is, what is this? Great Tate Debates. Is that right? Great Tate Debates. Okay, fair enough. Thanks, gentlemen. My analysis is the ruling powers will not sanction certain people off the chessboard. Putin is one of those personalities. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting, right? I don't know if you've watched The Expanse. And in The Expanse, Avasarala, she's fantastic. That woman could be 80 years old and I marry her in a heartbeat. Avasarala, at one point, went on this fool's errand, believing that effectively there are rules. There are rules to political conduct. And in the context of these rules, I am protected by these rules in our political conduct. So yes, I'm going to go to this. I'm going to have two people with me. I'm going to go on the ship. I'm going to go away from Earth. I'm going to go away from everything that protects me. That's what I'm going to do because there are rules to the way that we engage. And I'm looking at this thinking, you're out of your effing mind. And the people that were with her, who were military people, are like, you're out of your effing mind. There are no rules. Full stop. And she's like, you people are insane. There are rules. She found out the hard way there were no rules, in which case they tried to kill her. Look, Russia is pretending as if there's rules in regards to political conduct. They're pretending this in so many ways. In one way, it's, well, we want to have formalized negotiations. We want to sit down. We want to do this. We want to do that. And Europe is like, we want you to die. We want you to die. Ukraine is in a situation where it's facing its existential existence. And countries that are faced with their existence need to bring in other pieces on the chessboard. How do you do that? Now, aside from the fact that Putin is a moderate, and anybody who they put into that position is going to have a hell of a lot of fire in their chest when they get into that position, and all hell will break loose. That may matter less to Ukraine than bringing in other powers into the conflict when they come in breathing fire because you've just injured, or for that matter, murdered Putin. Meaning the lot for Ukraine is not enhanced by getting rid of Putin. By the same token, it also has a potential for bringing in other forces into the conflict. Does Ukraine come across as a rational actor to you? They've effectively been fighting a propaganda war where Russia has been fighting a real war. And they have been losing, up to this point, over 1 million men as a result of their failings in regards to running the conflict. Part of the reason of not taking Zelensky out is he's incompetent. And if you put somebody else in, they may actually be more competent than Zelensky, which means you may have less people getting killed on the Ukrainian side, less territory being lost on the Ukrainian side. Putin is a different cast, though. He is not incompetent. And who knows? I guess my point is, if Putin is believing that some kind of rules of conduct, some gentleman rules of conduct, like this is Oxford rules or whatever the hell they call it, that this is going to somehow save his life and protect him, I don't think he would be sitting in a bunker in the way that he lives in a bunker. He has to know that his life is on the line. He has to know it. And so if he full well believes that his life is on the line, I full well believe that his life is potentially on the line. And the defense of the Russian military, the military capabilities and everything else is the thing that ultimately keeps him safe, not to mention a hell of a bunker outside of predominantly the range of Ukraine's capabilities. Yeah, I don't think he's a chess piece where they would not be willing to take off the board. I just don't. The war against Russia has been taking place going all the way back, you can say before the Russian Revolution, but definitely kicked at speed in the Russian Revolution, like 1914. John Helmer even talks about this, the short war versus the long war, Ukraine being the short war, the longer war being against Russia as an entity and as a state. I don't think that changes. And if they had the opportunity to potentially take Putin off the board, I think they might. If not, yeah, I think they might, especially if they had some kind of plausible deniability built into it, where Russia wouldn't just unload on all of Europe as a casus belli for war against NATO. So I could be wrong, but I don't think that's the case. Wandy, USA, welcome back. MTG isn't lying. No, I don't think MTG is lying. I suspect that Donald Trump did tell her that. But who's going to go to MTG and say, hey, man, I'm a pedophile and I don't want them to out me on the list? Who's going to do that? Like, do you really expect Donald Trump to tell MTG that he's a pedophile and he's on the list and his association with Epstein? No, of course not. So I don't doubt that he had a conversation with Trump. I don't doubt that MTG was told that by Trump. I don't doubt that she's lying, that she's not lying. She's probably telling the truth. But I'm saying it's kind of like an what's the word I'm looking for? Unreliable narrator. It's an unreliable narrator. You're reading a book. If I'm reading Albert Speer's book, and Albert Speer just telling you all of the stuff about what was taking place, his role, him talking to Hitler and everything else, he's an unreliable narrator. He's giving you his first person point of view and hiding things he's hiding and telling you things that he wants you to know. It's just unreliable. So I don't doubt that that's what she was told. My doubts are whether or not it's ultimately true, coming from Trump, considering he's all throughout the Epstein list. He's been friends with a guy for 20-something years who knew the guy, his predilections. Why would I believe? Like, look, man, drugs is different. Mob bosses are different. People look at mob movies and think that mob movies are awesome. I mean, hell, you look at rappers who emulate mob bosses. They're not emulating somebody that they detest. When pedophiles go to prison, they are the lowest rung for a reason. And yes, you could say that killers and murderers want to find somebody to look down upon. Okay, fair enough. That may be true. But they are a particularly detestable bunch. I'll say it that way. Yeah, I don't know why he would own up to it. You know, I could be wrong. I just don't know why. Let me check on David. What time is it? David's supposed to be coming onto the show. Let me make sure that David is still joining. Give me 1 second. Okay. I'm going to assume that David, and I wanted to talk to David today, Trump attacking Nigeria was big news, especially considering he had a good take on it. And then just Trump attacking Nigeria, Trump also going after, well, I guess Israel effectively saying that they're going to have this kind of open, this intervention in Africa. That was the other thing. And David was pointing out that this was something that he had been warning about. The people had been let's say, not necessarily owning up to the reality of it. One thing I will bring up, I am shocked that it took the New York Times to write a post about the CIA working in coordination with Ukraine. I would like to point out that several of my guests, what is his name? Andrei Telizhenko. Andrei had pointed out years ago that the CIA was all throughout Ukraine. And he even pointed out that if Donald Trump really was interested in peace or really interested in getting some kind of deal, that he would pull the CIA out of Ukraine because they are effectively the ones that are running operations. Now, the New York Times came out with a post that seemed almost comic in its obviousness. They point out that the US military was fledgling, not doing well, was effectively losing miserably. And in the process, in the context of losing miserably, you get the CIA effectively saying, hey, we'll do what we can do in this. Now, when Operation Spiderweb took place, you had me on my show crowing that it was obvious as all outdoors that the United States was intimately involved in that particular attack. Trump administration was quiet for days on end, which again is very odd if indeed you have nothing to do with a particular attack, that anybody who's paying attention would believe that you had something to do with, whether it was the information that was given in order to attack the locations, whether it was the missile systems that were effectively being used, whatever. They obviously were intimately involved in that. And then you add in the terrorist attack at Crocus Music Hall and these type of things. Okay, well, this is giving you a take on the US point of view in regards to we need to create threats. We have no leverage in the situation. If this is decided through military means, we are going to fail and we're going to fail miserably. Okay, so what do we need to do? We need the black arts. We need to somehow end up in a situation where we can exert leverage while having some kind of fake plausible deniability that I don't believe for a moment that the Russians believed, but at the very least, an oratory plausible deniability in the process. So that's what they did. So they had what they considered to be, oh man, Ukraine has gone rogue. Ukraine is attacking train stations and just murdering people outright. Ukraine is attacking the music hall. Oh, Ukraine is attacking part of the nuclear triad. They're doing all of this stuff. We didn't know anything about this. And you have to believe that the Russians call BS on all of it. Which is why the question came up for Helmer. Oh, good. David is here. David, we only have like 7 minutes. David, welcome, man. We only have about 7 minutes, but I do have one question for you before I let you go. David Hundeyin, this is the audience. He is an investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, founder of West Africa Weekly, and is the 2023 James Carey Fellow at Cambridge University. David, welcome. We are going to have a very short time, but I do want to get one question in before I let you go. Yeah. The attack by the U.S. on Nigeria. Give me your take on that. I mean, it was a question of whether or not the United States was actually going to make that attack or do that attack. But apparently they have invaded, I guess, some aspect of Nigeria. And I would imagine Nigeria at this point is outraged. What is going on with this?
So, I mean, we had a conversation about this on an earlier episode, and perhaps I didn't expect it to happen this soon, but it's played out pretty much the way I said it would, which is there was this kabuki theater between the US government and the Nigerian president, who is a US puppet, and they carried out a symbolic airstrike. The airstrike itself didn't necessarily do much. There's no evidence that it actually, it targeted a part of the country that doesn't really have a terrorist problem, and it basically scared a bunch of villagers more than anything else. But what it did, more importantly, was that it established precedent. This is the first time, to the best of my knowledge, that a foreign power has unilaterally, and it was unilateral, regardless of whatever the Nigerian government has to say, has unilaterally carried out a military action on Nigerian soil that has created a precedent. If it's been done now, that means it can be done again. And that means if you like, the Somalification of Nigeria has begun, where the US government can basically just wake up on the wrong side of the bed and carry out multiple airstrikes in that country on a particular day, as is the case in Somalia. So, in 2025, the number of airstrikes the US government carried out in Somalia was in the triple digits.
Yeah.
And Nigeria has started entering that territory. That's what this means. So for now, there haven't been any casualties. There's been no real damage. But again, it's the precedent that this is established that is the main takeaway from here. And unfortunately, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you're expecting that this was met with consternation or with condemnation across a broad spectrum of Nigerian society, the answer is no. Because unfortunately, as I've explained to you before, Nigerians being the victims of this long-term brainwashing operation that they are, there has been a significant, I wouldn't say the majority of responses, but there's been a significant portion of responses which have basically been almost jubilatory. That finally the big brother in the room is coming to help us to fight these terrorist Muslims, apparently. It's been very disappointing to watch for someone like me and for people like me. But again, these are the results of this sort of cultural terraforming operation, which has been put into play for decades now. So I guess it's not a surprise that it's turning out this way. But having said that, that is not to say that I'm going to give up. That is not to say that people like myself are going to give up, and we're just going to accept that, well, Nigeria is Somalia now, the battle is lost, let's all just go drink and die. That's not the case. We're going to still keep on trying to raise the level of consciousness and education of our people and try to get our people to be a bit more geopolitically literate. It's not a project that is going to take a few days, weeks, or months. This is a project that takes years or decades. But well, no one else is going to do it for us. We don't have any other choice. If we want to keep on existing as a people and keep on having a place on the planet to call our own, if we want to keep on having a civilization that exists as a going concern, then we just have to find a way. That's what we're going to do.
Real quick, when you say the Somalification of Nigeria, are you talking about the bombings or the attempt to break up Nigeria into parts, like having this
Both.
Somaliland stuff where they're talking about moving Palestinians to? Oh, you're talking about both.
Absolutely both, because the exact same elements are in play in Nigeria as well. Somalia is just like further ahead in this sort of staged state failure that Nigeria is also in the process of going through. So the so-called Somaliland, you could approximate it to the so-called Biafra in Nigeria. And it's, by the way, it's not going to surprise you in any way to know that it's the same Israeli people behind both projects.
Yeah.
So the same way you have the state of Israel giving recognition to Somaliland, is the same way you have these exact same Israeli elements providing funding and support to the so-called Biafran separatists and publishing policy pieces on the website of the American Enterprise Institute, one of the most influential conservative think tanks in the US, stating that the US government should recognize Biafra as a breakaway state from Nigeria, that's part of the decolonization of Nigeria, that Biafra shares a Judeo-Christian values, whatever those are, with the US. So it's the same people that are behind both projects. And it's also the same people behind the long-term destabilization of both countries, Somalia and Nigeria. And it also won't surprise you to know that Somalia and Nigeria also have some of the largest energy deposits, oil deposits on the entire continent of Africa. So it's the same thing. So Sudan, Somalia, Nigeria, they're literally the same project at different stages. So Sudan had the South Sudan breakaway thing, which was also a US and Israeli supported project for the long-term breakup and destabilization of Sudan. And then a bit further behind, you have Somalia and Somaliland, which hasn't quite reached the same stage of recognition as South Sudan. It's not yet an independent republic. It's on its way there. And then further behind, you have Nigeria with the Biafra project, also, funded by the same people. And then further behind Nigeria, You then have Mali, which obviously, now that it's part of the AES, they're not going to find it as easy, but they were trying to push a similar project with the so-called Azawad Republic. So again, the idea is break up every large African states and basically ensure that they have as little economic and political influence going forward as much as possible.
Jesus, David, you did warn us. And yeah, I mean, yeah, they certainly did attack. And it's shocking to me that a country will be okay with its sovereignty being violated, or at the very least, let's say elements of that country being okay with the sovereignty being violated. But yeah, it's just disappointing. David Hundeyin, thank you for this, man. I know it's not much time, but I thank you for breaking both of those down. Those were definitely the topics I wanted to hit you with today. David, he's an investigative journalist, author, and filmmaker, founder of West Africa Weekly. My man, thank you for this. Be safe, okay?
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye. All right, and we have a new guest. He is punctual, and he has my appreciation for being so. Dr. Issa, and I want to make sure I get this name correct. Dr. Issa Blumi, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Excellent.
Good morning. Yes.
Dr. Issa Blumi, he's professor of world literature and Middle Eastern studies at Stockholm University within the Department of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. You have my appreciation for joining me on this. I think I want to start with you on Iran. So Donald Trump came out, I guess this was a day or so ago, and put out this tweet. Now, granted, I don't entirely pay a huge amount of thought to Donald Trump's tweets, if I'm being bluntly honest with you. But there have been protests that have been taking place in Iran. And maybe, let's start there. There have been protests in Iran. What has been the rationale or reason for these protests? Are these entirely externally driven, or are these internal pressures that are pushing these protests also?
Certainly lots of support, logistic and otherwise, with people who have their feet in both Iran itself and in the outside world, regularly trying to drum up such kinds of actions. This is kind of following a playbook that we've seen scattered throughout the region for decades, where you try to initiate street protests that are potentially can spread out of control. Unfortunately, you have people who are trying to instigate a violent confrontation with authorities in order to get the kind of outrage that is needed to continue and support this way of pressuring a targeted government. In this case, it is something that has been ongoing, and one does get the sense that there's a larger apparatus of the diaspora that's been very active in trying to destabilize and reverse the revolution since 78, 79, are somewhat frustrated by the behind the scenes diplomacy that goes on in Iran. So I think there's certainly a lot of those old CIA, USAID backed organization dynamic at play, but there's also these people have their own resources to initiate these kinds of things, and sometimes they may even be doing it outside the circuit of control from Washington. It could be coming from Turkey, it could be coming from Israel, it could be coming from Azerbaijan. So we have to be a little bit more, let's say, guarded in how we make sweeping conclusions about what's going on. But it is not reflective of a larger stability of Iran. It is something that's it is capturing somewhat of frustrations that people are having, living under the conditions of economic embargo for so many decades, of war that has quite blatantly, very sometimes nasty iterations of conflict. So that's the hope of those who are organizing these current uprising riots, is to actually get a larger swath of Iranian population who are just waiting for some reprieve from what they've been experiencing over the last 30 years. And the government, to be honest, is a very different kind of government than the Revolutionary Council one that's been supporting a struggle globally for decades. It has been making lots of concessions from the availability of public spaces for women who are not wearing what in the past were considered restrictive clothing requirements, referring to a very loose hijab. Iranians never really had a very strong enforcement of like full coverage of a woman's head, but it's certainly been marketed in the West as one of the primary concerns that Iranians have, which is not the case. But nevertheless, Iranians are eager for access to the outside world, eager for economic reprieve, better conditions for their day-to-day lives, more opportunities. It's a very educated population. There's been a lot of problems with especially the weather. It's been a drought in Iran for several years now, and that's putting a lot of pressure on people. So people are speculating on how that's all happened. Why? So people are now talking in many different directions and not thinking clearly sometimes. And this is the kind of opportunity that such street protests hope to exploit, to create a much bigger phenomenon, like we've seen in the Arab Spring, or we saw Maidan in Ukraine, or periodically across the continent of Africa. So this is
So
right.
the spark was effectively economic, the real losing value against, let's say, other currencies. But there are other reasons and rationale that piles on to that spark that you were pointing to. I mean, from my understanding, there were all sorts of fires at IRGC, either bases or installations. This is fascinating to me, and I don't mean it in a sick fascination sense, but more so during the 12-day war, you seem to have this extraordinary unity of purpose in regards to, let's say, the government and the government's policy in regards to pushing back. And within it's been 6 months, give or take, and now you have protests. Is it just that the war was a unifying element, but there are obviously other things that also take precedent in the context of the country itself?
Well, just before the actual exchange of real, let's say, deadly weapons that you're referring to, there were already attempts at sabotaging. There were infiltrators within the military. There were attempts to create gridlock, to instigate kind of breakdown of the electrical grid, of how cities were functioning. So that's a long-term buildup of these kinds of saboteurs, these assets that are available to NATO and to Israel. And they've been regularly trying to infiltrate security apparatus. They've been targeting scientists for decades.
Yes.
Obviously, there are also other ways of putting pressure on those kinds of targets, including making their lives difficult. And so economic sanctions for all these decades have certainly put a strain, especially on the younger population who were not born during the period that the revolution not only took place, but also experienced what happened immediately after the Iran-Iraq War, which was had a galvanizing effect on Iranian society, a society under siege. That was the impression. That's changed after new generations who are increasingly attached to the world by way of the telephone, who in some cases do get a chance to travel a little bit when they study or after studying. And so they want what they see, what they think is a normal life. It's a society that does have, on a very basic level, has taken care of its own. You don't have homeless people in the streets. You don't have starvation. But Iranians have sometimes been built up to expect better, that they are a leader in the larger world, as opposed to ones that are generally constantly living under the threat of war, or their professors in physics are getting assassinated, or once they get a PhD, they go and look for a job elsewhere. So brain drain has been a serious debilitating factor in how Iranian society can still see itself as a leader in the world. And unfortunately, even their so-called allies are regularly exploiting this vulnerability. I mean, Iranians' natural resources are being sold to the outside world with significant price reduction. So they're not seeing the full possibility of even their wealth. being realized. And so this is something that's putting tensions at the political level. So there are factions within Iranian political class that have already made very clear that they want to move away from this confrontational revolutionary history to one where they can cooperate and work and make business. There's a whole class of actors in Iranian society that go back at the beginning of the revolution, who have long conflicted with interests, sometimes even willing to work with the CIA during the Iran-Contra affair, if you recall.
Right.
And Rafsanjani, who is a leader of this clan, whose own personal corruption caused significant tensions within the Iranian political scene in the 80s and 90s. But a new generation of these bazaris, as they call it, the merchant class, who are making money on breaking through the larger embargo on Iran. But there's a lot more to be made by rehabilitating Iran and letting it being partner in the larger world economy in a more explicit and formal way. And this is something that is on offer, which for some of the rivals to Iran does not want to see. It fits better a kind of regional politics if Iran is the boogeyman, so to speak. And if Iran is rehabilitated, then they end up actually exposing what actually is at play, which is the destruction of Middle Eastern states, plundering of their natural resources, inducing a regular conflict within these societies that makes it very easy to continue to redraw borders, expand certain colonial projects' territorial reach, and as well to exploit the available resources at the expense of, let's say, post-World War II states that existed since the end of World War II, since the end of French and British formally imperialism in the region. So there's a lot of factors that may contradict what we seem to be thinking, is that there is an active attempt to destroy Iran on the basis that it's an enemy, or an enemy that is fighting the war against forces aligned with NATO and Israel. That's not necessarily where we're at this stage, but we're kind of trapped in a kind of way of thinking about the world that is very dangerous, because we've long been manipulated to think about the world in terms of we're fighting a war against the Soviet Union. We're fighting a war against terrorism, Islamic terrorism, Iranian-backed militias, whether it be in Lebanon or Yemen. And now we have a new way of thinking about things in Sudan, right? It's a conflict between Emirati-backed groups and Somaliland, we're constantly told to think about the world in these terms, but what the political class in Iran is trying to do is to break out of that relationship, that language and calculation that Iran is inherently in opposition to, and can only be dealt with as an existential threat to the region. And we see this at play with their overtures to Saudi Arabia, their overtures to other Gulf countries. We see this, they're opening up, and with Russia, even though Russia historically has long been a predatory neighbor, and deemed deep inside the kind of ethos of Iranian history as a threat, they have long made attempts at opening up their relationship with Russia to expand their access to the global markets. And in the meantime, this new generation that has come after the death of the last prime minister in a helicopter crash is making very explicit efforts to open up Iran and avail itself to being integrated in the global economy. But that doesn't necessarily mean the former rivals to this Iranian state want to see it in this way. Iran is better disaggregated, to be broken up into separate ethnic units. Baluchistan in the southeast, Azerbaijan can expand its influence up to Tabriz in the north. We can maybe have an Arab Emirate being created in the oil-producing areas of the southwest, with the Persians of Iran finding some accommodation in the center of the country. But again, there are those who are gaming the end of Iran, just like they gamed the end of Syria or Iraq,
Right.
or Yemen or Libya or Sudan. With your last guest, Nigeria may be on the way to also seeing itself being disaggregated along these kinds of lines. And I think, unfortunately for Iran, they may be in a trap where they can do whatever they can to try to be rehabilitated, but there are others who actually don't see that as the positive end result. The end of the line is the destruction of an Iranian state.
That's what I was going to say. As you was explaining that, I kept thinking to myself, regardless of what the individual country wants, it's still stuck with kind of the realities to which they're confronted with. And, if you're talking about the United States, if you're talking about Israel, Iran made these overtures. And these overtures ultimately was used entirely for predation.
Absolutely.
I mean, the US, Iran, look, as an American, I look at my country as full of sociopaths or psychopaths. And when Iran was making overtures, I understood why they were making overtures, especially with this, let's say, reformist government that's in play. But from my point of view, I know how my country behaves, and my country behaved exactly as I thought it would, where it would, in one sense, pretend as if they're having negotiations, and in another sense, try to have a decapitation strike to effectively destroy the government of Iran. And so it's like, they may want to reform, but on some level, aren't you still stuck with the reality of what you're stuck with? Even Saudi Arabia, for all of its talk about working with Iran, it effectively was knocking missiles out of the sky in order to help Israel, not to mention the other Gulf states. Like, this seems to be somewhat of a trap. Or correct me if I'm wrong if you disagree with anything I just said.
Look, people at the global south, the working classes of Europe and the United States, in the post-industrial world as well, they need to know who their enemies are. And we often get very distracted about who they are. And we have to go back to almost Marxist critique of capital in order for us to get our hands around what is actually at play in all of our societies. And we end up getting distracted by the racism, the sectarianism, the ethno-nationalism, and all the other kinds of tools that end up confusing our narratives and our ways of analyzing things. And unfortunately, societies in the larger world often think that one could somehow make peace with an empire that has been built on destroying and plundering after the destruction of sovereign peoples, indigenous peoples. How could anyone in North American history ever argue that it was a good idea to sign a peace treaty with the United States federal government in the 19th century and to agree to move your entire population from your homelands in, say, the Florida Peninsula to Oklahoma, as if somehow this is going to look good 100 years from now? There was, of course, a regular history of genocide, of deceit, of betrayal, of agreements that don't have to be made anymore. I mean, the United States as an economy is habitually breaking the rules, right? I mean, regularly, every president, whether Democrat or Republican, is regularly giving out of jail card for the most corrupt elements who steal and plunder billions, trillions from the U.S. economy, let alone what happens in the larger world. So we're dealing with a society, a system that is inherently corrupt, is lies through its teeth, and will never and ever, withstand or withhold any kind of agreement, especially when it's a ceasefire, as we can see what's at play in Palestine over all these decades, right? In Lebanon, and again, all the countries have. If you have a political leader who is saying that we have to negotiate and come to a conclusion where we can have peace with these people, with this apparatus, what I call empire, they're just not, either they're naive or they're somehow corrupted. You cannot justify pursuing this kind of relationship, or inevitably you're going to be destroyed from inside with such things like these groups who have been empowered to represent a very narrow interest, whose primary function is to continue to disaggregate these societies, to break these societies apart, to create tensions within societies, or from the outside, we have people who are based in the West who are advocating for certain kinds of peaceful solutions and reconciliation and all that nonsense that gets think tanked and gets produced and floods our internet with information about conflicts around the world. But in the end, they never really break down what is actually at play. And what is at play is the targeting of all of these societies' resources and plundering them without compensation, there's no interest in working in partnership with these countries. Iranians will not be the beneficiaries of anything that comes forward. Just like after the Mossadegh crisis of 51, 52, 53. The solution was to impose a dictatorship who stole, but the lion's share of the money fled the country and went to Wall Street. And that's what all these families who are ruling the Gulf right now, that's their responsibility and role, is to subdue and to see not an equal distribution of the wealth of their societies, but to make sure that the lion's share of that wealth ends up being repatriated into London or Wall Street. So that's sadly, I think, a general problem throughout the world. And unless we see it that way, we're going to constantly be duped. We're going to be killing each other, fighting for the right to sit across a table with people who are habitually lying and stealing and killing when necessary.
So where do you? Okay, that's interesting. I misunderstood. I guess I misunderstood the first point, which is where my question came from. Where do you see the Pezeshkian government then? I mean, there's, as you know, there's a lot of people who believe that Rouhani was murdered, that this wasn't just a quote unquote accident. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's not relevant to the point, but it is relevant in the context of a lot of people see a difference between the Rouhani government versus the Pezeshkian government, who has been willing to, let's say, reach out and make those, let's say, treaties to the West in a way that the Ayatollah didn't seem to be willing to. He seemed to have been screaming caution all the way through this, whereas the Rouhani government, less so. Where do you place this government in, I guess, the grand scheme of things in regards to Iran as a whole? For example, Nima, I believe his name is, from Dialogue Works. He's Iranian. He's in Iran right now, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. But he pointed out that a lot of people also had issues with the way the Pezeshkian government was willing to negotiate, as opposed to holding a much harder line in regards to dealing with, let's say, the West, especially with the slights that has taken place in the context of the West towards Iran. Where do you factor this? How do you contextualize this?
Right. Well, as I suggested, that there have been this incremental move towards precisely this position that we're seeing now publicly by this current government, which has caused fissures, and it's a reflection of this long-term concern of trying to reduce the ability of the Ayatollah and the Revolutionary Guard and these old school revolutionaries who have been fighting for a long time. I mean, they're getting old, right? And that new generation is just not building the same kind of, they don't have the same motivations. So they have to be, again, convinced that that trajectory, that approach needs to continue move. The current government has a kind of a populist underbelly to it, which does want to see these tensions. See, they want to see a change, and that's what really upsets those who believe that this would be a major mistake. We can't trust these people. We signed a treaty to withdraw from our development of nuclear energy and nuclear technology, and this, next elections comes, and then this gets swiped aside. And in the meantime, our scientists, our sites have been infiltrated by the UN observing agencies, and they were then the ones targeted by the latest rounds of bombing. So Iranians who are taking that more hardline position and trying to reverse this process of moving away from revolution, moving away from confrontation, are going up the hill because they don't have the larger population who, again, are a little bit confused. They're detached from that period of horrible living conditions and horrible oppression and the humiliation of, a dictate coming from Washington to say who's going to be your king, and where much of the resources are going to go. So the revolution reversed that, but people kind of lost touch with that, especially those who've been born 2000s and onwards, right? And now they're the ones who potentially can go on the streets. Now, I'm not saying that whole Generation Z is ready for full regime change. I think the current government is speaking to them, and they collectively want to see Iran become member of the larger world community, again, mediated by how the United States and Europe sees that. They will be willing to fit the criteria, and they'll be willing to sacrifice Syria, Hezbollah. They'll be willing to sacrifice a nuclear program of deterrence. They will be willing to sacrifice the Revolutionary Guard, which we're seeing, right? The last couple of years, its leadership have been targeted and successfully assassinated in the field. I suggest that there's probably people inside who are able to help with the targeting of these people. I mean, even downtown Tehran is not a safe place for people who are targeted by the United States or Israeli forces. So this is, but as I ended the last statement, this does not necessarily mean that this is not going to save Iran. And people are a little bit naive if they think that if by capitulating, that somehow will provide them and guarantee a future of simply focused on development. No, this country is targeted for disintegration. Look at any other country around it. I mean, how could anybody feel comfortable with the idea of making peace with those who have been actively trying to break it into pieces for the longest time?
Yeah, that's the part that confuses me, I guess. Like, I've watched the 12-Day War. I watch the sanctions. I watch the Israeli attacks. I watched the Nuclear Proliferation Agency effectively give a pass to attacks on Iran. Like, after watching all of this, it looks like people will come to the conclusion that, okay, look, this is not entirely an issue for the government. This is kind of external forces that are effectively acting on you. But what is it? Just there are people who are internally who believe that if we get rid of the government, if we get rid of all of this other stuff, then we will be treated fairly. We will be treated equally as a country. Like, what has given them this appraisal that this is true? I mean, they've watched Syria, they've watched Lebanon, they've watched themselves get attacked consistently.
I mean, I would extend this question to anyone in the larger world. I mean, Americans, why are they still invested in a two political party system in the United States? I mean, how many more times do you have to be, betrayed and feel betrayed and realize that your life, your quality of your life for you and your children have just is collapsing because both parties are incredibly so. People are delusional, right? People really don't want conflict, and if you can create constant fear of conflict, that makes them very pliable. It makes them actually willing to accept some of the more outrageous solutions, whether it be Barack Obama or MAGA, right? I mean, both. No. I mean, the middle of American society who has been suffering from the power of Wall Street for all these decades. They were desperately grasping at anything that was projected to them as a solution, and it eventually backfires on them.
Same difference, basically.
And I'm sorry, this is one way we can use this as an example of what's happening in Iran or any of the societies, whether they're happy that what happened in Syria over the last 6 months or elsewhere. I mean, it's just people are just desperate for an end to this, and they're willing to sometimes subscribe to those who are positioning themselves as we're going to offer you. Now, I can't question the nationalism of the current people who are making decisions in Tehran, but I can certainly question their strategies and the arguments that they're making that we have to actually go in a different direction and not continuously confront seems to me to be a big mistake, if indeed that's their intentions, is to somehow rehabilitate Iran on a nationalistic, patriotic sense. I'm not convinced that people are patriots per se, however, and some people values actually extend beyond the boundaries of their country. So we have a lot of political leaders in the world right now who seem to have loyalties to something that's much bigger than their own constituency. Whether it be people who were living in Europe, who are led by political parties that often have agendas that seem to be more global than attending to the local needs.
The
from
nations themselves that they're
nations. I mean,
particularly in. I mean, you can look at Germany and see Germany's economy just falling
complete
apart.
destruction of industry within a couple of years, and it plays itself out throughout Europe, I'm afraid. So again, who are these people who often by executive decree, without any consultation with the people that supposedly they are serving, are issuing incredible kinds of laws and new kinds of strategies that, as we saw in Germany or in Scandinavia, no one asked Swedes if they wanted to join NATO. No one bothered to ask. It's just we're no longer a neutral state. We're now going to be on the front lines of a war with our neighbors moving forward. And people are pissed off in Sweden for that. The same applies, I'm going to suspect, is applying with some of those people you mentioned who were your sources of information. What's going on in Iran is that there are executive decisions being made now that completely contradict this investment, this sacrifice of 2 generations now to try to somehow preserve and protect and project a resistance to global capitalist imperialism. And Iran was on the front lines of that for a long time. And it seems that the political class in power now are steering Iran away from that. And obviously, some people are going to be very upset by this for obvious reasons, because they feel that they need to continue to struggle. Others are saying it's not happening fast enough, or this is an opportunity now for us to secure power as leaders of a Kurdish party or a Baluchi independence movement, or a upper middle class kind of who controls a certain sector of the Iranian economy. So there's all kinds of potential now ways of manipulating and continuing this campaign of disaggregating Iran, to breaking into separate entities. And the solutions then to that problem, that civil war that could come, will be ones that I can assure you the borders of Iran, which have been regularly changed over the last 200 years, by imposition from the outside world, will again change, de facto recognized by outside world or otherwise. So, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because this gets this whole idea of external forces that are affecting internal events. Donald Trump came out, obviously. Well, I'm just going to actually take on this. Trump says if Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to the rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. Now, this is ironic coming from somebody who was trying to overthrow the U.S. government and was out there, had his cretins and lunatics fighting cops and breaking ribs and all of this other stuff and putting cops in the ER or the hospital. But whatever. They don't say this when there's the yellow vest. They don't say this when there's protests in other countries. But for Iran, they tend to make a specific focal point. But one, I don't believe that Donald Trump for one moment is going to invade Iran to help or support protesters. But to your point, I do believe that he would try to reach out to people who are, let's say, a certain demographic of the country that are less inclined to nationalistic instincts and more inclined to maybe globalistic instincts. Give me your take on this, though. How do you see this?
Well, certainly there are various. I mean, the United States government is not a monolith. There are factions. There are different conflicting interests sometimes who are pursuing different agendas and try to harness the formal state, or the so-called deep state, as some people like to call it. And again, they are often at odds with each other about what is the medium and long-term strategy to realize these very different objectives. The problem with the opposition in Iran is that it's also so very divided. And I can assure you that those who are probably with significant amounts of money supporting the idea of the return of the dynasty under the Pahlavi family, that's something that is absolutely not going to happen with Iranian support on the ground inside Iran itself. That's something that, but nevertheless, it is something that is being flirted with in certain circles in Washington and elsewhere, just because they simply don't know, because there's a career to be made to advocate such a return of the Pahlavi government. And then there are others who are advocating for the creation of no-fly zones, just like what they did with Iraq, in terms of protecting Kurds. There have been some violent confrontations, and Iranian forces have bombed radical so-called Kurdish elements that receives U.S. arms in Iraq late last year. And the Baluchis story is an ongoing one. Azerbaijan and Azeris, which makes up 25% of the population in Iran, who have just across the border in Azerbaijan been very predatorily expansive territorially, disaggregating Armenian populations while supplying Israel with weapons and gas and petrol on a daily basis. So there are a lot of elements who don't necessarily see eye to eye on many things, but nevertheless do have a common objective, which they can use a common ally, which is this larger ethos that the Iran needs to go away as an entity. And so these various actors are trying to capitalize on that and become players in shaping American policy. So there's no doubt in the CIA, or whether it's the State Department or the US military, that, sorry if there's a background noise. There's no doubt that there are conflicts. I mean, there are some who would love to see the United States sacrifice tens of thousands of soldiers' lives to see a reversal of the government in Tehran. They would love to see civilians being bombed, strafe bombed. I mean, you have, again, these sociopaths, these mass murderers who advocate murder of Gazan civilians or of Sudanese or Ethiopian or Somali peoples, and they don't give a damn if they see Americans dying in large numbers and are coming back with psychological problems from Afghanistan. So why would they in any ways not continue this approach of using American firepower? But there are restraints to that. And so that's where the voices of others who are saying, well, you didn't do too well when you were confronted in the Red Sea by Ansarullah. Literally the US Navy, it was exposed for its tactical weaknesses and its inability to protect itself. And that's the last thing that the military industrial complex wants to be exposed when they're actively trying to sell a new generation of weaponry or trying to promote a kind of buildup that constitutes trillions of dollars of expenditures. So they would go the kind of soft power route of mobilizing the streets and getting people to get photogenically killed on the streets of Iran, just like it happened in many other places, and use the media to pitch up a demand for something to happen. And I suspect there are in Washington those who are in conversation with those in power in Iran right now, and behind closed doors, again, are much more closer to coming to certain kinds of temporary agreements than confrontation. And you can see that play itself out in, they both more or less agreed to leave quietly from Syria. They're working together every day in Iraq, whether we believe it or not. I mean, they have to, right? Because their auxiliary forces are looking at each other from across the street every day. There could easily be a ratcheting up. If Iran was still a revolutionary entity that supported revolution and change, there would be much more tensions in Iraq right now, or in other neighboring countries, that it still has supposedly capacity to change things on the ground. So we're not dealing with an Iran that's in any ways, shape or form close to what it was like in the 80s and maybe in the early 90s even. And so this is being exploited by a variety of actors who want to have a little bit of influence on policies moving forward. So Trump's tweet is just a reflection of a kind of populist politics that suits well a certain audience. It even catches our attention. We actually give it time, right?
Yeah.
But it's not a realistic reflection of the variety of actors who are actually trying to create new conditions on the ground. And again, my ultimate conclusion is that there's a vast majority of them who actually don't want to see Iran actually survive this with a peaceful, friendly government in power. They actually want to see the territories itself, like all the other countries in the region, broken apart into much more easily plundered zones of influence that are commandeered by a warlord who gets paid off pennies on the dollar of the oil that gets siphoned off, as we saw with Syria or parts of Yemen or Sudan today. So that's my ultimate suggestion to your listeners, is that we're actually dealing with conflicted sets of approaches that are certainly not articulated well from the White House, but they're articulated by these disparate actions that are seemingly contradictory. You have behind the doors, closed doors, conversations with the leadership in Iran right now, and they are regularly working together in dealing with problems in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria. There's been a clear attempt by leadership in Iran to demonstrate that they are not invested in being a destabilizing force in many theaters, but to no avail. Again, it is at best naive. I don't think these people are naive, though. I think they understand perfectly well what this could mean in the future, but it is certainly an empowering component to Iranian domestic politics that they are the faction who're saying, let's have peace with the world. Then there's the other elements that we don't want any element or aspect of a unified Iranian state to survive this transition that is bound to happen under this process. And then, of course, the old revolutionaries who are saying, well, not only should we keep this country together, but we should also be projecting our influence and trying to right the wrongs of the larger world, which unfortunately this group is shrinking because of age, because of attrition. They're dying, and they need a new generation to support this revolution, and they're just not able to produce it through their educational system or through media. They have lost that propaganda war. Oh.
Wow. One last question before I let you go, because I've kept you for a while. What does Russia and China fit into this? Especially with this idea that Israel is threatening a new war, or the initiation of a new war. I would say they're allies, but you may quibble at me saying that.
Yeah, I would not want them as allies. I wouldn't want to depend on them as allies. One, as I mentioned before, they exploit the vulnerabilities of Iran and actually are able to secure Iran's natural resources for significant price reduction to market prices around the world. They're controlled markets. They are desperately willing to hemorrhage and surrender a lot of what a sovereign state would do in terms of protecting their own economic interest, if you will. And secondly, both countries openly trade and have very good diplomatic relations with Israel. We know that Russia shuts off its on its bases in Syria, shut off all its radars to allow Israeli planes to fly undetected up until Iraq, at least. And similarly, there's military equipment, advisors, and Chinese and Russian investors in occupied Palestine. That has been going on since the end of the Cold War. Certainly for Russia, we have hundreds of thousands of Russians who are dual nationals, who are occupying and continuing to expand settlements in the West Bank. It probably will be at the forefront of occupying parts of Gaza moving forward. And some of the main beneficiaries in this global trade that Israel is part of, especially at the high end of technology and weapon systems, are Chinese. Energy companies, the management of ports, Haifa, these are Chinese companies. So unfortunately, this is the kind of, out of recognition of this fact that in the end, we don't have a series of superpowers who are willing to stand and defend, arm, and project and destabilize diplomatically, economically the enemies of revolutionary peoples around the world. They continue to work and exploit, just like the West does. Again, Iran is integrated into the global economy, but it's integrated through these countries, these companies that are profiting from so-called smuggling illegally Iranian oil and gas and industrial goods and trading their own industrial goods almost with exclusive access to Iranian markets, which means Iranians are buying Chinese and Russian things as opposed to Chinese and Russian made things that are bought from Western countries. So this is not a country that is in a good position. It does not have real friends in solidarity who have capacity to actually, for instance, issue a veto in a vote to whether or not Donald Trump's program for Gaza moves forward or supplies weapons to the peoples of Palestine or Hezbollah or Yemen to actually fight off the encroachments of global capitalist empire. Now, those countries are integrated into the global economy. Their political leadership are intertwined with the very wealthy ruling classes of these societies. We're talking about a small number of billionaires, just like in the West, with a working class people who's working every day, just trying to make ends meet. They're all on credit now. They're all also in debt. And unfortunately, arenas where there should be more solidarity from our own people on the streets, but also from revolutionary government. They may come from Burkina Faso. They may come from these small enclaves of resistance that are surviving, but that is in spite of what Russian or Chinese governments are doing, which are not in any way helping this resistance move forward. So I have to somewhat not only quibble, but actually be very emphatic that we need to, again, change the way we think about the world and continue to think in these terms that as if we're still in the Cold War, where we have lost.
See, I consider countries realists, that they function in their own self-interest and maybe even brutally in their own self-interest in the way that they effectively operate. Why don't they see their lot in life as, and this could be the last question, why don't they see their lot in life as being better together as opposed to just these individualistic entities that may come together out of self-interest, but for all intents and purposes, less so? Because I think a lot of people, especially people who are looking at BRICS, for example, looks at BRICS as this hopeful entity that would be this, let's say, secondary fulcrum of Western financialization or financial capital, that it can be this other thing in the world that people can go to, or that at the very least, there's not one point of view in regards to finance in the global system. And I always, when I talk to people who are heavy with this point of view, I would say countries are realists, even in the context of BRICS. Many of these countries are very different in regards to their political and economic systems. They are going to function whatever is in their best interest. Why don't they see the world in these terms in a way that the West does, where the West seems to lump together in regards to accomplishing their political objectives? But that's not really the case. At least it doesn't seem that way in an overt sense for the East.
Well, because economically and structurally they are part of the West. From Gorbachev onwards, Yeltsin and Putin successfully destroyed any kind of sustainable, independent Russian economy. They've been taken over by oligarchs, and Jeffrey Sachs mediated the plunder of this old Soviet economy. It broke apart into multiple different republics, all run by dictatorships who are making business with the big corporate enterprises that plunder their resources. And China, since Deng Xiaoping, have opened up, right? They murdered the last remaining elements of the older revolutionary population. And Deng Xiaoping, who was persecuted under Mao, comes back and is openly making overtures to European American capitalists to come and bring their industrial capacity to China. We have all these hundreds of millions of workers to exploit, potential workers. This is what has happened. So we need to be able to accommodate this rethinking of the history of how China and Russia are integrated into the global economy since the end of the Cold War, China even earlier. And so all of our gadgets are made in China. The working classes of China are exploited. There are no unions. There are no ability for them to actually renegotiate the terms of their employment. They live under a draconian police state now, surveillance state since COVID. Maybe many of your listeners understand that from social credit kind of phenomena. So for the for the economic class, the ones who are the main beneficiaries of making Shanghai into this light show, is the same ones who've made Times Square into a light show, right? And but they don't represent the people who turn on the lights, who make the lights, who have to clean up the garbage after the New Year's party, and that means the lion's share of the population are living under a kind of economic exploitative system that, whether it's in the United States, in Europe, and it's been transferred wholeheartedly, just like the factories have been transferred. The whole social relationship with capital has been transferred to China. And Russia is not a major industrial power. Its population is dropping dramatically. It's living under the rule of these oligarchs who are more than happy to wage war around the world and do business with the same ones that they're supposedly waging war against. So I would suggest that, and if you want to bring up the BRICS, as it's often happened, Modi, the one who's using Hindu fascist kind of rallies to go after Muslim population, is the last person I would think you could call a revolutionary, who was embracing the idea of supporting peoples of the global South to resist global capitalism. I mean, we're talking about societies that are run by a very small ruling class of economic financial elites who are deeply integrated into the global economy. Burkina Faso, what's happening in northern Yemen, and these other enclaves, is the attempt to break out of that relationship that is on demand. This is the expectation. You're going to have war and you're going to have destruction if you're not availing your resources to our society, to our companies, society in French. The resources, the raw materials for the new green revolution, the cobalt that people in Congo still dig by their hands, these horrific pictures of these fields of thousands of our brothers and sisters toiling away on these open mines in Central Africa and Southern Africa. Those resources are going to the factories in China to make the phones that end up in our pockets, or make the electric cars that we love to drive around in and make ourselves feel good about it. The same conditions that subsidize the West is subsidizing now the creation, a la Henry Ford, Fordism of the first half of the 20th century, that made the working class in the United States. It's an excellent working model to give resources of the working classes to actually buy the products that they make. That was what Henry Ford envisioned, and that's basically what has been applied in worlds where parts of the world where there was no industry until 1970s, 1960s, 1970s. And this was what Deng Xiaoping and his generation, up to Xi now, have availed to the world. Capitalist dominant powers interest is that they have now a working class who are busily working in very poisonous environments, exploited. They have no unions. Okay, they have a television. Okay, 300 million of them now live like middle-class Americans. Hey, that's a great market, right? That's precisely the kind of economic model that realizes perpetual profits for certain groups. But does that mean that the people of China are actually realizing their dreams and aspirations as it's currently understood in strictly materialist ways, or is there a moral component that is frustrating people in the West right now? They're realizing that this American dream is not a dream. It is a disaster. And now they're beginning to wake up and they're becoming politically mobilized. Well, China, this could happen soon enough, but under a kind of police state that is not going to be able to realize what looks like it's going to happen in the West, where you're not going to be able to say anything on social media because you're going to be shut off. You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your access to your bank account. So those kinds of factors, I think, does not make the BRICS story actually work. The beneficiaries are the same class of people who make Wall Street in London, these centers of evil, right? This concentration of evil intention. It concentrates wealth to a very, very small group of people at the very top at the expense of our natural world, our environments. The world has never seen so much plunder of natural resources over the last 20 years. And it's all going to these newly developed BRICS capitalist economies that are doing the lion's share of the industrial work. And in the meantime, they're their laboring classes, their savings go for new investments to build infrastructure in places that there was no interest in money available for building infrastructure in areas that were, until 20 years ago, untouched natural reserves of Central Africa. Now they're all accessible by trains and buses and trucks, and accordingly they're being plundered, with local people being exploited as cheap labor, just as it was 100 years ago.
See, I think it's more complicated than that. I mean, that's, if you wanted to give the worst portrayal of it, that is it. Raising 800 million people out of poverty is not nothing. And I get that China has an explosion of inequality and everything else, just like in a capitalist system. But I do think there's a difference in the way that China has utilized the resources that they have as opposed to the US. I can tell you, as living into the US and being in China, I think it was a few months ago, there's a drastic difference in the way that wealth seems to be utilized, in one case, entirely for, let's say, an oligarchical class in the US, whereas at the very least in China, there's this kind of feedback mechanism that does take place. But fair enough. I do get it. I agree with you that there are people at the bottom and trying to, let's say, manage that while pulling people out of poverty. China has suffered difficulties like any other country has tried to suffer difficulties under a capitalistic, quasi-capitalistic model. So that's fair. That's kind of fair.
I can assure you the rest of the world understood the California dream for what it was. Well, the California dream is a nightmare now. And so there was a period of time when the United States economic model was the model for the world. And it brought up millions and hundreds of millions of people from poverty who moved from elsewhere and became, on top of course, the indigenous peoples of the Americas, and on top of the fact that they were able to exploit the natural resources. For a while, the United States was the living model. And what Chinese working classes today are living in American life. So that just gives, that's one way I can maybe respond to this idea that people were brought out of poverty. They may have been brought television sets and a car, but what did they lose morally, spiritually? And in the next generation, what's going to happen to those people who already are being scammed of their life savings? Many tens of millions of people don't have the money to pay back the loans that they have borrowed money to buy a nice apartment in one of those big blocks. And what's happened to them? So we're seeing a very rapid transformation of Chinese society, that's for sure. But it's happening full speed. The kind of cycle, what has happened to the industrial West is now happening as we speak to the hundreds of millions who've become uplifted by Deng's opening up in the 1970s and 80s. So I don't wish ill on anyone. I wish that it was a different scenario, but it is also, for me, an important thing to be aware of moving forward. As I started the show, the Iranians need to know who their enemies are. We need to be a little bit weary. And I think also people of the global South generally need to know where our enemies and where our hopes lie. And the hopes lie in actually going back to understanding how the world works in a revolutionary critique of capitalism, because capitalism is at play, and exploitative capitalism is at play around the BRICS countries as much as in our post-industrial society. So we're going to have to support. We have to support local people to resist, to disaggregate this project as a global revolution. It's not going to happen on the terms that we're living in right now. Maybe the next generation who embrace Sankara, who embrace the resistance in Sahel and in Yemen and elsewhere. Maybe then we can start afresh. But right now, celebrating the expansion capacity of an oligarchy, a global oligarchy, and that the crumbs that the rest of us get is somehow the solution long term. That's, again, our brothers in Africa, our brothers in the Middle East and Latin America are suffering. Their lives have not been. They are continuously subsidizing the industrialization of another component of this capitalist monstrosity that has emerged since the 19th century.
Dr. Issa Blumi, thank you for this, man. I really do appreciate this. Great breakdown.
Thank you.
I was very curious on your take on Iran after hearing an interview you did with someone else. And so I like the fact that you were able to break that down and kind of explain your take on these kind of internal, I guess, divisions that on some level supersede the state. And in other cases, this kind of undermining of the state itself. No, great breakdown, man. Thank you for this. Dr.
Thank
Issa
you.
Blumi, he is a professor of world history and Middle Eastern studies at Stockholm University within the Department of Asia and Middle Eastern Studies. You have my appreciation for this. You be safe and have a good day. Or rest of your day, I should say.
Me too, my brother. Take care. And to your
Bye-bye.
audience as well. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right. Shout out to Dr. Issa Blumi. Let's see. We have chats. Let's go to chats. I read the other one. We have Aether Blue. Aether Blue gifted Jamal Thomas 10 memberships. Jesus. Thank you, Aether. You have my appreciation. That goes about what? Pretty much the entire year. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Diane Thomas, Jamal, I'm glad you're back. I know you will, what is this? Hit your 100,000, keep up the good work. Well, I will do my damnedest to hit 100,000. She's talking about subs. That's why I always ask people to subscribe to the channel. My goal is 100,000 before I drop dead. That is my goal. That is my aim. Happy New Year's, Jamal. So Russia and China aren't white knights. A lot of people wanted them to be. In fact, they seem to be so bad as the West in the same ways. I guess they aren't expansionists, at least. Look, I will tell you that people who look, from my point of view, countries are realists. And I mean that through and through, which means that there are going to be elements to those countries that are good. There are going to be elements to those countries that are bad. But all things being equal, those countries are going to work in their self-interest. There are going to be some elements of self-interest you're going to agree with. There are going to be other elements of self-interest you're not. They're not magical things. At least in my mind, they're not. Dr. Issa Blumi gave maybe the most brutal appraisals of BRICS countries. That a lot of it, I agree with it and I disagree with it. It depends on the topics or the subjects that we hit, right, when we're hitting on it. These are capitalist countries. China's quasi-capitalist, so yeah, I suppose, in parts. Social credit is BS. I don't buy it. Exploitation. I mean, Jesus, you've pulled. Look, do you want a poor country of 1 billion people, or do you want a rich country of 1 billion people? Pick your pony, right? That's what you're stuck with. And so this idea of, well, these aren't perfect entities. Well, I don't believe in perfect entities. I don't think people are perfect. Countries damn sure aren't going to be perfect. Do you get a secondary, let's say, model orientation of the globe? It depends on what you mean by secondary orientation. If you're saying, do you have a socialist orientation, then the answer is going to be no. China is socialist with Chinese characteristics, which I don't quite know what that means. But do you get a second model of orientation? I think the problem that comes in, right, is when people believe that BRICS is this revolutionary ideological force. They're not. They are countries that joined together for their self-interest because the West was effectively running the table. It's just that. There's no magic to it. But I know a lot of people want there to be magic to it, in which case they bestow upon BRICS something that I don't really think that they are. This is not like the Soviet Union where you had this kind of revolutionary spirit and you had an ideological core to the way that it operates. It's not that. These are countries that are looking out for their self-interest. If they do things that happen to coincide with their self-interest that we agree with, great. But there will be things that you won't. Be aware. I know a lot of people are flying the flag of this. But just be aware, they're realists. They're looking out for self-interest. China creating, let's see, whole new systems like Google and Microsoft, space exploration. Agreed. That's what I'm saying. I disagree with that takedown. Like, it ignores. Look, if the only thing you're looking at is, are they using capitalism in order to bring people out of poverty and expand their capabilities in the global stage? Okay, yeah, but that's a very small part of a larger entity of, again, as you point out, space exploration, software, technological innovation. Oh God, you can go down the list. It's like you have a country that at the very least has a tendency to invest back into the country as opposed to just giving the money to a bunch of oligarchs. There's a difference in these things. How they were able to pull themselves out of poverty, fair enough, but there is a difference in these things. Yeah, I disagree with some of it. Some of it I get, some of it I disagree with. All right. I am going to call this a day. Happy New Year's to all of you. I hope this is a damn good year. I hope things, at the very least, if not on a global stage in your individual lives, are better, even if incrementally, than what they were in the previous year. I wish you health. I wish you happiness. And let's hit 100,000. There's that. I want to say thank all of you for joining me. And I will see you guys bright and early Monday morning. I am going to start a weekend show with either Ted Rall or God damn it. One second. Okay. I'm sorry. I saw a message that I needed to check. I'm going to be starting a morning show with either Ted Cross or Jesus. Why can't I never remember? Nick Cruz. This is it's not Black Agenda Report. He is with Revolutionary Blackout Network. That's what it is. I need to figure out the day. I need to figure out the time, especially given the time differences between us. But I think it will be a great add-on to the show that will drop additional content, hopefully drop additional revenue. Not to mention it'll be fun to have. So that is the thought. And I need to talk to Ted about it. I need to talk to Nick about it. I think both of them are down for it. We need to name the day and we need to name the time. So there is that. You all be safe, be kind to the degree that you can be kind. And I will see you all bright and early Monday morning. Once again, Happy New Year's all. Be safe.